All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Truckee Donner PUD regular board meeting. It is, let's see, once I can get to my 6:07 PM, Wednesday, September 6th. Shauna, could we have roll call, please?
Thank you. Director Finn,
Here.
Director Harris,
Here.
Vice President Laliotis,
Here.
President Bender.
Here,
The record will note that Director Aguirre is absent.
thank you. Tony, you want to lead us in the pledge?
Sure. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thanks, Tony. All right, number 4, any changes to the agenda tonight?
There are no changes this evening.
Great, thanks. Okay, number 5, public comment. This is time set aside for the public to address the board on any matter not on the agenda tonight. Testimony related to any agendized matter should be addressed at the time that item is considered. Is there any public comment?
No, Mr. President.
Great, thank you. So no public comment on anything not on the agenda. All right, we got director update tonight.
I actually don't have an update tonight. Cheers.
Okay, cheers. Tony,
Oh.
going right to left.
That's
My
okay.
way.
No, just, I don't have very many updates other than really thanking this community. We're running into September now, so it is now construction season finally. Just thank you for everyone's patience. There's a lot of road construction, a lot of people working out there. Our crews are working out there. We're all trying to squeeze in another 6 months worth of work in 6 weeks. So everyone's very busy. So I appreciate everyone's patience. We've had a great summer. So let's keep it up.
Thanks, Tony. Kim.
Thank you, Jeff. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our staff for all their hard work. We have had an eventful summer, and I know everybody's been working super hard. I see the trucks motoring around and, keeping our lights on and keeping our water flowing and keeping our customer service up to date and billing and everything. So I really appreciate all the work that our staff has done. So thank you.
Cool. All right, thanks. Okay, number 7, general manager update.
President Bender, we have a pretty robust schedule this evening with 3 workshops that I think are really important for the board, the community. So I'll keep my updates brief. Staff has included some updates, some general manager updates and department updates that really kind of illustrate all of the work that's being done this summer. A lot of capital improvement projects for the water utility, a lot of pole inspections, ruggedizing of the infrastructure on the electric side, vegetation management, all the things the board is aware of. What I do want to comment on is we have a new member of the team I'd like to introduce to the board and the community. As we all know, Joel Horvath, our current electric utility director, a staff member, a teammate for the last 24 years as a electric systems engineer and now utility director, has taken on the task of retirement. And we're really happy about his future he has in the next phase of his life. His last physical day at the district will be September 22nd. He'll be kind of on the book, so to speak, but using some PTO and some vacation time until December. But with that said, as we separate with Joe and he goes on into the sunset of retirement, would like to introduce Jared Carpenter as our new electric utility director. Jared, would you like to stand up? A little bit of embarrassment. Jared has over 20 years of experience in the utility sector as a consultant, as an engineering planner, and as a utility director. He most recently comes to us from the Port of Oakland, managing their utilities, both water and power. And so really excited about bringing Jared on board. He has a lot of experience in operating, managing, leading an electric utility, a similar size to Truckee in terms of load and some of the challenges we all face in resource procurement, supply chain management, planning, infrastructure development. And so has a great wealth of expertise and a new perspective to bring to the district. And we hope we have him on board here for many years to come. With that, I will hand it back over to you, President Bender.
Wow, thank you. Welcome, Jared. Again. All right, we've got a packed consent calendar tonight. And I am going to recuse myself for owning property on item number 11, and I own property within Grace Crossing. So I'm not going to vote on that. I'll abstain. And are there any questions on the consent from the board? Okay, any public comment on any consent item tonight? All right, seeing none.
I'll move the consent calendar.
Second.
Shauna, roll call, please.
Thank you, Director Finn.
Yes.
Director Harris,
Yes.
Vice President Liliotis,
Yes.
President Bender.
With recusal of number 11, yes on the rest.
The record will note that President Bender recused from number 11, and the record will also note that Director Aguirre is absent.
Got it. Thank you. Hey, look at that. 6 minutes in and we're at our first workshop item. Okay, workshop item number 15, Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems, otherwise known as UAMPS power presentation. And there we are. Thank you for UAMPS for joining us tonight.
President Bender, as we set up the presentation, I'd like to first start off with kind of framing the context of the presentation and what to expect over the next several months from staff and our partners at UAMPS and some of our other JPAs that we're affiliated with. The district's taking on several projects right now, all kind of geared at the overall mission of setting up our energy procurement plan in the coming years, the decades to come. We're currently engaged in an integrated resource planning effort using Aspen Engineering to help the district really lay out load forecasting, energy procurement opportunities, and what our overall portfolio can look like over the coming several years and what the opportunities and risks are. And so we're looking with Aspen and staff to present that report later on this fall. We're also taking on a new electric energy rate cost of service assessment. The board later on this year will evaluate the energy rates for our community. And so with that, we have to consider a lot of changes that we're seeing both locally and across the energy sector of the Western region. Things like electric vehicle charging stations and the different load profiles they present to our community, electrification, some of the other, energy use behavioral characteristics of our community. You have some new initiatives that we're adopting through the strategic planning process that kind of broaden our focus, not just to renewable energy, but total net carbon reduction. And so this all kind of dovetails together for later on this fall for the board to give staff some direction and set some of the policies moving forward. This presentation this evening is one of several that we'll present over the coming months on what some of the energy generation opportunities are out there, either through our membership with UAMPS or other sources, things that we've talked about in the past in terms of baseline, base load, net or carbon-free energy sources such as geothermal, the NuScale nuclear energy project, some of the other intermittent sources such as solar plus storage, the expansion of the Horse Butte Wind project. And so we're very happy, very complimented that UAMPS and their team have agreed to come out and join us this evening. They traveled from as far as Iowa, I think, and Tennessee, and then Mason and Jackie have traveled from Utah to begin a series of presentations on what some of the procurement opportunities will be for the coming years. UAMPS is also participating in their own integrated resource plan on behalf of their membership. So I appreciate the board and the public taking in the information that we present in these workshops. Very much looking forward to the feedback and guidance in the future, and it'll kind of help staff frame some of the action in the future. So with that, I will hand it over to Mason Baker, the CEO of UAMPS.
Not yet.
How about now?
Now. yes.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Mason Baker, CEO, General Manager of UAMPS. I've been with UAMPS for about 12 and a half years. I was formerly the General Counsel, so I'm a recovering attorney. Spent a lot of time with Steve Gross through the years in various capacities. It's really nice to be in Truckee. I've got close friends that live here. I've climbed up on Donner Pass a good bit, so really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Most of the conversation we want to have this evening is related to one of the resources that we're working on for the members, the Carbon Free Power Project. Before we get into that, I did want to take a moment and celebrate the Red Mesa Tapaha solar project that went online this spring. Really interesting project. To give you a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar, we signed the power purchase agreement with the Navajo Generation Inc., which is a subsidiary of the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, back in the summer of 2019. And this was a point in time where solar pricing was going, everyone was chasing it as low as it could go. And we did that, great pricing, and then COVID happened and supply chain issues happened. They managed to navigate through those challenges, bring the project online during COVID, which was a very big deal for the nation who maybe aren't that familiar with some of the struggles that the Navajo Nation had during COVID. They did an incredible job on it. And we had the opportunity to be down there 2 Fridays ago to celebrate it. The president of the nation was there. And for the nation, it is a priority for them to look at how they're going to do this energy transition. For those that aren't familiar, many Navajo have spent a lot of time working in energy jobs in the Four Corners area. That's where this project is. A lot of those big projects, what we're talking about, are coal plants and coal mines. They've shut down in the recent years. That's had a devastating impact. And the neat thing about this project, and something that NTUA is doing moving forward, is looking at projects where they can actually own the generation source and then have that equity built up. And then they make the decision on the future of the plant. Because the reality is, on some of those coal plant decisions, retirements, they had very little influence on how those plants were retired. And this is sort of a step moving in the direction of having a little more control moving forward. So really neat project. Other aspect of it that we found really attractive when we looked at it for the UAMPS membership, a lot of the nation is not currently electrified. So some of the proceeds from this project are going towards a project called Light Up Navajo. Many of our members have sent line crews down there on, pro bono basis to do that electrification work. But the revenue from this project is also going as seed money to that. So they also gave each of the members these plaques. So I wanted to give Truckee Donner their plaque, really cool plaques that a Navajo made commemorating the project. So with that, I just wanted, before we launch into discussion about nuclear, celebrate this, because we do a lot of project development work, and frankly, you don't always get a lot of wins. So it's nice to celebrate one.
Cool. Sure.
I think this would be a great opportunity for the board to convene as a photo opportunity with Mason, commemorating the start of the Red Mesa project for the district.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to pass it around, it is really pretty cool.
Here, let me show you. Oh, you're totally. Yeah. Wow.
All right, so. All right. So I guess shifting back to tonight's discussion, a little bit of background quickly on UAMPS. Organizationally, what we're about is developing projects for our members. And sorry.
Okay, I'll be up in a second.
Oh.
So it wasn't just me that was hearing that. Okay.
Right. Oh,
So I'm good to go.
yeah, good.
Okay. So we develop projects, do energy service support for our members, 50 members in 7 Western states. We are very much community driven. Our members elect what projects to participate in or not. That's why we're having this discussion, to have a dialogue about resources. We'll talk about the Carbon Free Power Project in particular. You can see, as our name suggests, we started out of Utah and have spread out from Utah. Most of our generation projects tend to be in this area of the map that you see, where we have transmission interconnection rights to bring the energy back home to those members. As we talk about nuclear, I think it's really important that we level set on what all we're looking at as far as new resources, because as we talk to our members, we try to make sure that we've got a good understanding of a portfolio approach of dealing with power generation, where you've got good diversity in the resources that you're procuring and serving your communities with. This slide shows what we're currently looking at. We obviously have Red Mesa that came online this spring. We have 2 additional utility scale solar projects that are coming on later this year. We're also looking at another solar project with batteries. We have the potential to look at batteries in addition on those first 3 solar projects, and we are doing that. We're also actively pursuing geothermal. We're looking at repowering, really kind of adding some additional output from the existing Horse Butte wind farm, as well as expanding it. So that work's underway. We're looking at doing additional natural gas. That is very much for us a bridging resource. We have capacity needs where we need this form of generation that's dispatchable, where we can control it and deliver the electricity to the communities. We're studying that currently. We're also looking at a waste coal facility that's in the study phase. And then last, we're looking at the Carbon Free Power Project, which we'll get into more. Like Truckee, we are also undertaking a integrated resource planning exercise right now. We're wrapping that up. We're seeing, just sort of big picture preview, we're seeing a lot of need for new resource, where we pretty much need to look at every type of resource opportunity moving forward, given our member needs. Within that membership that we saw the map of, there's a lot of load growth within those members, and that is without much electrification. So what I mean by that is, if we start seeing more and more EVs come on our system within our member communities, which there's a high probability that there will be, and we're starting to see it, we'll have more need than we are currently even forecasting, and we're looking at that right now. And I think with this slide, I'm going to transition and turn it over to George Griffith. I've worked with George for 6 or 7 years. He's from the Idaho National Laboratory. He's going to provide some background on nuclear, just so everyone sort of has common understanding of nuclear features. And then we'll turn it over to Chuck Goodnight to talk about, from NuScale, to talk about the NuScale technology specifically. And then I'll finish off talking about where the Carbon Free Power Project is in its development and what the participation opportunities look like. So with that, I'll give it over to you, George.
want to start out with saying how happy I am to be here. This is really the outreach that Idaho National Lab values. We see a number of projects where dealing with communities, power companies, with nuclear, and almost this exact topic of what is nuclear about is central. So this is a very nice presentation to give. I look around the room here. My wife is from a family of 9. And so this is almost like a discussion when we all get together. People want to know these sort of things. To start out a little framing, nuclear reactor, that's like saying vehicle. It's not a thing. It's not that big tower. The power levels for these plants can range from 5 megawatts for a little plant coming in the future that would power a remote community or a mine or part of the Puerto Rican grid after a hurricane. Very special use applications all the way up to some of the really big units like the European pressurized reactor, which becomes a national strategic asset. So you've got this huge range of things that all fall under nuclear power and reactors. So understanding some of the details helps a lot. The plant in the middle there on the bottom is where I spent a lot of time. So I'm from an operations background at a plant. A lot of fun, a lot of interesting things there. Next slide. So what would you like to know about nuclear energy? One of which is it's there, right? The current fleet of plants designed in the 60s, basically 70s, built in the 70s and 80s, operate at 93% capacity factor. That includes outage time. Plant I was at was up in the high 90s, and we used to get trouble because there was a plant in Kansas that was in the very high 90s, right? Had to do with a lot of things, but that's the level at which that's being driven. And it's basically based on safety. If you're tripping your plant, the NRC comes in and says, what are you doing wrong? And so everybody stopped tripping their plants. They have high capacity factors. They're designed to be safe and online all the time. And that's one of the critical values that helps nuclear support intermittent resources. So it ends up, studies at INL and other places, nuclear and renewables work together better than either one does alone. So it's an additive effect, a system of systems, that portfolio that Mason mentioned. So that's one. Next slide. Nuclear energy is clean, right? It's the highest clean source in the US. All the waste is managed and controlled from beginning of life to end of life. And again, they support mixed environments. Nuclear energy is safe, robust, multiple safety features. The new generation of plants will be even safer. And there's been no radiation-induced injuries in the United States. There's very few accidents overall, and you can see that in the slide. Next slide. Manageable, again, all the waste is managed. Safe storage options do exist. I know we haven't implemented one here in the US, but some European countries have. There is a federal program with a waste isolation plant for military waste that's been successful. So there are solutions to that. And there are shorter term solutions as well. Nuclear energy actually is affordable. That bar graph up in the upper right, you'll hear solar and batteries is the alternative for what I'm going to cover my variable needs with. But you can see the prices of that overrange the nuclear ones. One of the nice things about this study is it was done all on the equal footing, right? Economics is an example of where you just argue about your assumptions. Well, this at least has the same assumptions. Again, that dispatchable energy source to make up your total grid. We think that nuclear energy is environmentally responsible. The plants are very small. The footprints are small inputs. They are physically clean. They have very high power densities. And this is where I messed up. The best analogy I've seen recently is one pellet is about the size of a gummy bear at a nuclear plant. And that's as much power as a ton of coal. Right? A ton of coal is a very large piece, right? Fill up a fraction of a truck. I live in the Midwest, so you see the big trains rolling along, and it takes about 1 train load of coal to run a power plant for a day. Every one of those going through is 1 day at a coal plant. And the US is restoring historic damage. We're involved in some projects in the Four Corners area, and just the education on what happened in the past is a big deal. The DOE very aggressive about trying to address former issues, have better solutions now. Next slide. We think it's socially responsible, supports local communities. The biggest set of questions we're getting right now at INL is, my coal plant is shutting down. What would it take to get a nuclear plant in its place? You already have the grid connections, the water, the services, you understand the site pretty well. And it continues those jobs or even creates more jobs, more payroll, more tax base. So it's good for communities where it shows up. US leadership with nuclear supports the world. I was talking with Chuck here. We're getting questions from Armenia and Uzbekistan and all over the world where they're interested in US technology because they know that's the gold standard you can get. So if you're going to do it right, you come to the US to do that. Advanced reactors offer extra benefits. These are the reactors that aren't necessarily cooled with water. They're liquid metals, liquid salts, gas cooled. They can potentially go to very high temperatures, which allows them to support industrial applications. If you had steel to be refined, drying processes, making hydrogen, supporting a decarbonized environment, and then potentially higher thermal efficiency. And the biggest benefit probably is less waste for the same amount of heat there. Next slide. An example, these are some of the employment benefits from an internal study that INL did, showing that you create hundreds of jobs in an area. And they're high paying jobs, and they support the community as a whole. Next slide. And this is the site for the CFPP. One of the requirements to build a nuclear reactor is that you actually have to have the people show up and put their eyes on it physically. Mason was part of these visits. The picture on the right was done in, I think, early February at INL. We had two of the people coming to visit wander off over a hill into the fog, and I asked their security guys, is there going to be any trouble finding them? And the security guy says, no, we'll find the bodies in 2 or 3 days. So next slide. And so some takeaways, modern reactors offer improved benefits through their physical and design features. That's where all those things come from. It enables renewable resources. They work better together than they do separately. They're designed to do that. Safety, economics, performance are all improved going forward. Waste issues have solutions. We haven't implemented them yet for a variety of reasons, but they do have solutions. We see all sorts of reactors being developed. One of my jobs at INL is to work with the vendors, and we probably have 10 or 12 different companies always wanting to engage with INL about moving forward. And then something you guys are painfully aware of, the market is developing rapidly. What you think today is probably not going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Well, nuclear is good for 80 plus years. And so it will support you over the long term. So that's the quick version of nuclear. I can get down into any of it with anybody who wants to, and it quickly spawns off to, I want to recommend you talk to somebody else, but we can talk about a lot of it. I do have some brochures that basically cover a lot of this material. It's from INL. So if you want to read about it, get some additional background, let me know, because we got a bunch of these. Thank you. Oh yeah, and a picture of, that's the Voyager at INL. It's supposed to go in. I'm curious to see if UAMPS is really going to irrigate that much space to make it green up there. So. Sure.
Percentage of the US is nuclear.
It's about 20% of the energy in the US on the power grid. And
Then why do they do efficiency?
It was a cost issue. So they went through a process to replace the steam generators to extend their life, to extend the life of the plant. And in the process of doing that, there were some manufacturing issues with a Japanese company and the design work that was done collaterally between Southern Cal Edison's team and MHI, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. And after they brought those in and they installed them, they spent a ton of money doing that and replaced that over the life of the extended plant design. They ran the first fuel cycle, and when they went to refuel it, they ended up in the inspections and found there were all kinds of problems inside that steam generator that were not radioactive. So it wasn't designed and wasn't manufactured properly. As a result, the question was, can we go back and try that one more time? And what will that cost? And will we actually get our money back at all, or what? And the bottom line answer was, we're just going to go straight. It was economics.
Chuck's next.
All right.
Another
question?
If
Depends on the plan. The current generation of plants is 18 months or 24 months. It's about 30 days down when you need refueling. The particular plant that UAMS is looking at has 6 individual smaller reactors built into the same facility, and so they'll stagger them, and so you really don't go down completely in the same. It's a nice feature.
President Bender, if I might recommend, and just for the purposes of making sure we record audio accurately,
Right.
if we want to, and it's up to your discretion to open it up for questions and public comment at any point during the workshop, but if we have the public or at least our consultants repeat the question at the microphone so that the rest of the public can hear the question and answer there.
Right, because you guys were dark, your questions. So sorry about that, but then we're gonna improve on the next question so so everyone can hear.
Yep.
Cool. All right, thank you.
Great, President Bender. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Chuck Goodnight. I'm the Vice President of Sales at NuScale Power. I've got about 40 years in the nuclear energy sector. I spent the first dozen working for the Department of Defense and Department of Energy on nuclear weapons programs. We call that uncontrolled fission. And then I went to the light side and I work now in controlled fission, which is nuclear power for commercial use. So pleasure to be here. It's great to be back in the region. The last time I was really here was when I learned to ski in the early 1980s at Bear Valley, just south of Lake Tahoe. So it's a beautiful place. I have a lot of fun memories here. So it's going to be back. I need to begin our presentation with a disclaimer. So we have received and continue to receive partial funding from the U.S. government through the Department of Energy. And so we have to make this disclaimer that says what I'm about to say is not a reflection of U.S. government policy or the Department of Energy. This is a NuScale presentation so that someone doesn't conflate those two pieces. Just here is a glance, and these slides will end up being part of the public record. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I won't read all of this. There's a lot of words on some of these slides, but just as a picture, just to give you a feel for NuScale, we are the first and only small modular reactor company to have our design certified by the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That process took a long time. The company is now formally about 15 years old. 2007, now 16 years old. We've spent over $1.5 billion in capital in research and development to get to this stage, and the company has grown tremendously. It started off with 2 people, and now we have about 600. We have a number of senior scientists, PhDs. We have a very large number of patents. And so this is a real company with a real product and real technology. And I'm very grateful to be able to show you one of our closing slides that shows you we're now manufacturing. So there's a little bit of history about NuScale. Let's go to the next slide. So the way our technology works is we provide modules. They're nuclear power or NuScale power modules. And the module is a bunch of things, but primarily it is a reactor and a reactor containment structure that changes the nature of how all of these things have to be built. So typically you had a nuclear reactor that sat inside a very, very large rebarred, steel, pressurized, domed concrete building that we don't need. That containment requirement is met by our actual steel casing. And so the building I'm going to show you in a few moments is not a containment building. It's a power plant building. And so all of the containment, and again, approved by the US NRC, is housed in that structure you see there. And you also see there's an animation, essentially a graphic of one of the full-scale modules on a truck. They are small enough and light enough that they can be delivered by special purpose vehicle trailers, but they can be pulled by truck, they can be delivered by train or barge. And so that allows us to do factory production and factory development of the modules and then ship them to the site as needed. They can be segmented into 3 segments as needed for shipping if that's required, but it gives a lot of flexibility in where these power plants can be sited. I can't read that fine print from here, but I can tell you some of the things that I know are in there. So the original design certification was for a 50 megawatt module. We have a 77 megawatt design. We have applied for the subsequent design certification to the NRC to go from 50 to 77. It did not change the size of the module. It changed the size of the core and some of the components, but fundamentally it's the same. There was a lot of margin in the original design. And so as we went through that later, we decided we'd go after that. So the NRC has docketed that application. What that means is they are now physically reviewing it. It's on a 24-month schedule that they have committed to us. They have been able to keep their commitments to us for reviews. So we expect that 2 years from last month, we'll have the 77 megawatt design certified as well. It has a design life of 60 years. To talk about that for just a minute, all of the existing nuclear power plants in the United States were designed for a 40-year life. And in the mid to late 1990s, the Calvert Cliffs plant in Maryland on the western side of the Chesapeake Bay decided to pursue a life extension application, the first one ever in the history of the US. And they did so successfully, and they opened the door to both the process and the things that were needed to take these older plants that have been running 30 plus years and have them recertified by the NRC for an additional 20 of the design life to now go to 60 years. So today in the US, there are 92 operating commercial nuclear power plants. There's a handful of research reactors in the Department of Energy laboratory complex, and another set in the university complex across the country. But the commercial plants, all 92 have been granted a 20-year life extension from the original 40 design to 60 years. If I have it correct, I think the first one has now also been extended to 80 years. So when we say it's a 60-year life, we put that in print, but I would be comfortable saying cautiously that it's probably going to be an 80-year life for our design. So when you look at this, and there was a comment earlier, when you have the front end of development of the project, the land acquisition, the licensing, the construction, the commissioning, the beginning of the life, 60 years, maybe 80 years, and then the end of life where you decommission the plant, it's really about a century. So it's really a very, very long-term commitment for all the players, for the communities, for the owners, for the operators, for us as a technology provider and service provider, and also for the NRC. So this is a cutaway diagram. Basically, the cutaway is from the top to the bottom. You're looking at literally half the plant as if you're looking into it. And what you see there are 5 modules. There's a slot there that's empty. The 6th one is actually coming in on the horizontal bay on the left. There's a crane overhead. So this is not the UAMPS plant. This is a 12-pack because this is half of a 6 or half of a 12. So the UAMPS version for the carbon-free power project site is 3 modules on that side of the plant. So 3 on that side, 3 on the side you're viewing from, and that gets you the 6. So we had the comment earlier, the question about refueling. So what happens in refueling is after all the modules come online, they're staggered coming online. They have to be brought in, they have to be tested, they have to be fueled, put back in, and then they're run through full commissioning and operational. And so when you get to the end of that 18-month cycle, you pull that first one out, the other remainder in the CFPP context, the other 5 will keep running at power. So the plant doesn't ever really shut down. The plant will be producing energy its entire life. It doesn't have a period of time where the output is 0. So that's an important difference. There's a lot here on the slide. One of the things that's not well shown, and I'll get into it, is there's the spent fuel pool. So when the fuel is pulled out of the reactor vessel, each one of them one at a time, it's placed where the cursor is right now on the screen for a period of about 10 years. And after 10 years, it's pulled out and put on a pad on the site inside the security fence. We'll show you that in just a moment. So it's really not that complicated. And what makes this concept, the technology, so different is the reactors are sitting in a very, very large pool of water relative to the size of the fuel. And so if the power completely shut off and all the operators suddenly died, the cores cannot melt. The physics won't allow it. There's too much water. And by the time the water boils off, there's now so little residual heat that they're actually air-cooled. And so the NRC has certified that design. And so this plant is literally walk-away safe. So let's go on to the next slide. Here's a graphic of the site. It's, again, very, very green for Idaho, but that's the layout that we're planning. It has air-cooled condensers, so it has a very low water usage compared to typical power plants. We're not running water off of some very large supply to run it over the condensers to cool them and cool the steam inside. So this is a portrayal of a Voyager 6, meaning 6 modules, 462 megawatts gross. This is what we're building or going to build at the CFPP site in Idaho. Each one, again, here is planned to be 77 megawatts. We anticipate to get that design certification in time to begin construction without any conflicts. And again, the air-cooled condensers. The area here, so that fence line, there are two fences. The outer fence line is what's called the owner controlled area. And the owner controlled area inside it is about 65 acres total. I hear different numbers within the company. I've heard people tell me it's under 100 acres. I've had others say it's 45 acres. I go, okay, look, guys, get a number, right? So turns out it's about 65 acres. So it's a relatively small amount of land that's needed to produce, 462 megawatts of energy. And another key piece here for us is in the development of the safety concepts and systems, the NRC has authorized a methodology. And so rather than say we can always do this, it's a methodology that we can use that will calculate the emergency planning zone outside around the plant. And it's site specific because every site is geologically and geographically unique. But in principle, most sites that we've looked at can have an emergency planning zone that is at the fence line. So it's total of 65 acres. That's the zone. Traditionally, it was 10 miles and it was a radius. And so if you do the math, that's 314 square miles that still sits inside any nuclear plant's emergency planning zone. For us, it's the fence line, not in the case in Idaho, but for an industrial customer, we could literally be parked next to an industrial facility. And so that changes the dynamics of, for example, transferring heat across rather than electricity because the distance would be short. So the whole point of all of this technology is it gives our users, our customers, a lot of choices in how they actually operate this facility using nuclear as a heat source. So let's talk for a minute about used fuel management. There are lots of terms. Some people call it waste, some people call it spent fuel, some people call it used fuel. George can talk about this for days, but fundamentally, again, I mentioned the fuel from these reactor modules goes into that spent fuel pool. It's not thrown in there, okay? The fuel itself is in pellets. The pellets are in rods, and those rods are in assemblies that are 17 by 17 rods per assembly. And they're very carefully moved with this crane over into the pool and put down very, very carefully and not dropped. Okay, and they're parked there and they're there for 10 years. And then we'll move them outside the building onto a pad on the site. I'll show you in just a moment into a dry cask that is incredibly safe, both structurally and from a radiological standpoint. One of the points I want to make about my career, including some of this, is in the 40 years, every time I go into these facilities, you get a dosimeter, right? What's your exposure rate? And between about 60 nuclear power plants, a number of US nuclear weapons facilities, and one US nuclear warhead production facility that was being decommissioned, my total lifetime dose is 0. That's how carefully the US government makes everybody manage this. And so I'm proud to say that, but I'm also grateful to say that. So let me go on a little bit more about the fuel on the next slide. So it's hard to see here, but if you follow that arrow down to the ground, inside the protected area fence, which is a very secure boundary, there is a pad called an ISFSI, an interim spent fuel storage installation. And that's where the fuel, when it begins to come out after 10 years inside the pool, will be put in these dry cask storage containers. They are incredibly strong, incredibly secure, and very strong barriers against radioactive release of ionizing radiation. I have stood next to one of these, actually a bunch of them, at the Diablo Canyon Power Plant, California, in San Luis Obispo, or outside of San Luis Obispo. And again, with a dosimeter, and my dose rate was 0. Okay, so these are very well designed, very sturdy, very secure, and very well tested. We use them at every nuclear plant in the country today because Yucca Mountain is not open. It was supposed to be open 25 years ago, and it's not. And so the utilities have had to put the spent fuel on site in these containers. So we've had several decades of development and perfecting the technology. So go to the next slide. That's an eye test, and I can't even read that from here. So I'm just going to hit a couple of points here. As I mentioned, it's really well suited to a number of applications, right? So grid resiliency, we can be put into a condition where we're working with renewables, right? It can also be and I'm going to jump across some of the slides, some of the elements here because I can't read them. But we don't require offsite power. So traditionally, nuclear power plants in the past required 2 transmission line inputs to power the reactor coolant pumps in the event of an emergency. We don't need that. Because of our safety case, the NRC has said you don't need offsite power to come in. We don't need emergency diesel generators to run coolant pumps because we don't have coolant pumps. It's natural circulation. So as a consequence, Our power plants can be connected to the grid or not connected to the grid. It's not required for safety. That allows us to deploy them in a lot of different ways. It can also be a black start. We can be one of the first ones, if the grid goes down, to come back up if we are connected to the grid and get power going on the grid. So we've got a lot of capability there. Mission critical facilities, right? So we can support things I talked about because of location. We can be right next to things. The green ones, I literally cannot read from here. My eyes aren't that good anymore. But basically, some of those topics are the flexibility of supporting carbon capture, right? Because you have the energy source for it. You can put it next to a hydrogen production facility, so we can produce hydrogen using the process heat coming off the plant. We can replace coal plants. Our number 2 plant, so number 1 is UAMPS and the Carbon Free Power Project. Our number 2 under contract today is in Romania, and it is a coal plant replacement. The plant has been demolished. The plant is being prepared now to site us there. I'll be in Romania in 2 weeks for a week talking to the ministry and the US Embassy and the utility and our customers in detail about some of the project specifics. But that project is also ongoing. So coal plant replacement is another one of these things. And all of this really helps to support the energy transition away from carbon-based energy forms. We've talked about some of these, right? So unlimited coping, we can run the plant, and it can cool indefinitely. We talked about the emergency planning zone. And then the last one, this, capacity and capability and performance. It's really unmatched. Having worked in the nuclear sector on the energy side since probably late 1980s, nuclear plants were very specific. They were base load, always on, and when they're off, they're 100% off for refueling. So you shut down and there's no power coming out. You got to talk to the grid dispatchers. You got to balance the load in the whole grid when you take off a couple of gigawatts of energy from a nuclear plant all at once. Based on what I've described to you tonight, that's a different situation for us. We can support a lot of different applications and opportunities. So that's really why I'm at NuScale. I found myself as a consultant telling my customers they needed to hire NuScale. And I said, well, NuScale needs to hire me. I go tell the people with an official badge. So let's go to the last slide, I think. Maybe not last one. These are all photographs. None of these are graphics. Even that picture on the bottom, that is the simulator control room in our facility in Corvallis, Oregon. We built the full scope simulator so we could demonstrate to the NRC how these power plants would actually operate and how they could be totally safe with no operators in the room. And so you see the manufacturing components, the testing facility, and the simulator. These are all real, not ideas, not PowerPoint. Here's the slide I'm really the most proud of today on our whole team. For UAMPS, for the Carbon Free Power Project, we have started manufacturing of the first module. It's in Korea at a Doosan facility. They have the heavy forging capacity to build this. The left-hand side is the first pour. It's the mixture of the metal alloys to get it into the right condition of the right alloyed carbon steel. And then the right-hand side is the actual forging of the upper portion of the module. It's not a video, but you can see from the picture, it was a screen grab from a video. And that's now on YouTube. I think it's on the NuScale YouTube channel. And so you can go watch the video of some of the production of that. So we're very proud to be able to say that not only are we certified by the NRC, but we're also in manufacturing now. We're not just on paper with a cool idea. So I could talk for days about this stuff. So let me break here and turn the time back to Mason.
All right. Thanks, Chuck. And to sort of get into some specifics about how we've been developing the project. So it is a very big project. We have set up a limited liability company to develop it. We have that staffed up. There's a project director who brings with him a tremendous amount of experience. He was over in China doing new Westinghouse construction over there recently. Then was also over in the UAE most recently doing the new big reactors that have come online successfully there. So he has experience doing these, what we refer to as mega projects. I also just pointed out that we've set it up that way because the rest of the UAMP staff, we're developing all those other resources that we talked about at the beginning because we have to keep procuring resources while moving this one forward. And because of the size of this project, it does need its own dedicated staff. we talked about the technology, it being 6 modules delivering 462 megawatts electric, sited at the Idaho National Lab. We do have a long-term site use permit with the Idaho National Lab DOE to construct, operate, and decommission the project. So it's effectively a 99-year lease. Right now, the participation in the project is all public power entities. We are talking to investor-owned utilities, but when we think about getting the project fully subscribed, we're being very selective in who we speak to, because as we talked about, this is a 40-year relationship. So the due diligence that we've been going through is very much focused not just on the economics and if it works for other partners, but are they going to be a good partner to work with? That is a very big deal for us. We've been in jointly owned projects. I spent days and days with Steve Gross in a jointly owned project. And there's just considerations that you have to know about. Next slide, please, Jackie. So economic life, the way we've been modeling it is on 40 years. We're looking at economics associated with going 60 years, because as Chuck has alluded to, that's within the design basis. You can get NRC extensions to go up to 60 years. NuScale is going through the NRC, nuclear regulatory process right now, to go from the 50 megawatts, which they have had certified, up to 77. That process is well underway. The second to last bullet up here does talk about the DOE cost share award that we have for the project. It's specific for the project. I didn't include the disclaimer. I should have as an ex-lawyer, but similarly, the views I express are not the DOE's. We're very appreciative of that cost share, and specific in how we've gone about developing this project. We've been very deliberate in having de-risking milestone events. So what I mean by that is there's a milestone that happens. We get a new cost estimate for the project, and we put it into our levelized cost of electricity model, and it spits out a result. And that's a decision point for all the participants in the project. When we negotiated that with the DOE and the cost share, specifically, it says it's weighted towards the early years, because we wanted to be able to have more support in the early years while we were going through the refinement of the cost estimate, as well as NuScale going through their NRC licensing process. So that's a huge benefit and part of the overall development structure that's important to note. As far as the commercial operation, first of 6 modules coming online in 2029, all 6 by 2030. Next slide. Sort of the why are we doing this? Just to hit some of the points again, from our perspective, this is the type of legacy resource that we need to be spending our time developing. We've had the benefit of legacy resources, whether it's a coal plant or whether it's a large hydroelectric facility, and over their lives, towards the end of their lives, they end up being the most stable, the most economic, and that's been hugely important to support the growth in our members. And we want to be looking at, okay, what is the next legacy resource? And when we look out in the landscape and try to find that resource, this project fits that profile. We're certainly going to do all the other renewable projects that we mentioned earlier, but we need to have this type of resource be part of the overall portfolio. And it clearly does not have CO2 emissions tied to it. And that's something that we're looking at sort of on a long-term basis as a necessary ingredient for any new resource. The fact that it operates with such, we refer to it as capacity factor, really what we're talking about is 96% of the year, 87, 60 hours it's operating. The solar project that we celebrated at the beginning of this evening's presentation has probably the highest capacity factor in the Western interconnection, which is pretty cool, based on solar irradiance and the elevation. And that's 32 to 30%. 33% capacity factor, just to give you sort of some appreciation for that. And as we've already talked about, some of the really attractive feature for us when we think about going down for a refueling outage, because we're always thinking about reliability. How are the resources that we have comprising the portfolio going to ensure the delivery of electricity to all of our member communities? So when we have one of the 6 modules come offline, we've got 83% of the facility operating. And that's a really unique aspect of the NuScale design. As far as that capacity factor, don't anticipate it degrading over time. Another aspect of the capacity factor, a big thing right now in the West, and we won't get into it in much detail, is making sure that we have adequate resources to really deal with the changes that are happening in the grid. And as we have more and more renewables, they're great, they're low cost, but it does introduce more variability into the grid. So that's something we have to be mindful of. And we can go into that some other time in more depth. Resource adequacy is an interesting topic. We talked about it as far as this being a resource that enables a heavy amount of renewables. And that's just another benefit of the baseload nature of the resource. Next slide. So it is based on current nuclear designs, and that's another thing that we found attractive from an overall de-risking standpoint. NuScale, to their credit, has done a lot of work on the supply chain, making sure that they can deliver the product. We've been watching that very closely in our diligence. Having the long lead materials start this year was a major milestone for the project. That's another benefit of having that DOE cost share. Since it's front loaded, they're paying 80% approximately of the current cost for the project. We wouldn't have moved forward with those long lead materials absent that level of DOE support. So that is a massive benefit. Until the summer of 2026 to approve our application, and then we go fully into construction, but we would have been doing that site prep work really starting in 2025, although not noted up there. Next slide. All right, so a little bit of the history where we've been. This time last year, we received a cost estimate from Fluor and NuScale. Fluor is the engineering procurement constructor, and we put that into our levelized cost of electricity model that produced a result, and we identified new pricing for the project at that point in time, and that's $89 a megawatt hour. That's still the number that we're using, and we'll use that number when we get the next revision of the cost estimate, which will come in later this month at the end of September. So we'll put that information in front of our participants. That's a critical decision point. A lot of the entities that we're talking to about subscribing to the project are very interested to see this cost estimate. But this has always been part of our overall development philosophy, is to get these cost estimates in and then see how we're doing and then decide to move forward. Next major decision point will be submitting the NRC license application. Based on the current schedule, should go in no later than January 10th and accepted by NRC in February. That's the February date. And again, July 2026, it would be approved. And the 2026 summer is when we go fully into construction and all modules online at the end of 2030, the first one on at the very end of 2029. Next slide. So a little more on the current cost for the project. We spent a lot of time working on our interest rate assumptions for the project. It is a very capital intensive project. And because of that, really what that means is that there's be a lot of principal outstanding when we issue the debt. And because of that, the interest rate can really move the levelized cost of electricity. So depending on the interest rate, that $89 number could go up and down. So there's a lot of sensitivity on that. We've got an external financial advisor that we work with to look at what the optimal plan of finance is for the project. We've been in a rising interest rate environment. I can say that when we did the interest rates about a year ago, our interest rates, based on a couple of weeks ago, have actually gone down for the type of financing that we would do. It's not a huge amount, but it's something. Total project cost, $9.3 billion. We have the DOE cost share that's approximately $1.3 billion. So then that takes it down to that $7.9 billion number. We're also anticipating taking advantage of the investment tax credit from the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed summer before last, and that would take the total project cost down to $5.13 billion. And that would be more or less the outstanding debt for the project once it becomes commercial. And based on those numbers, you can get down to roughly the $89 a megawatt hour. We're very closely watching the guidance that comes out from the Treasury Department on the Inflation Reduction Act, because you can see that it has a considerable cost reduction impact on the overall cost of the project. So we've been watching that closely. And I bring this all up because, these are all the numbers that we're going to be evaluating really over the next month as we get the Class 2 cost estimate and then rerun the levelized cost of electricity model and test it against the $89 price target. So, this is, again, really where we're at. This next month, a lot of activity reviewing the Class 2 cost estimate. We anticipate being done with running the LCOE model in early November. We also are working towards a requirement to get 80% of the project subscribed by the end of this year. We have hired a business development director who's working on that initiative. We have good conversations going on currently with interested parties that are external to UAMPS, are talking to investor-owned utilities. We are also talking to more sort of independent equity developers who see a lot of appetite within the large industrial space to issue power purchase agreements. And for those entities like data centers who want to have 24/7 clean energy. So we're having good conversations there, and a lot of activity between now and the end of the year. And a lot of those entities, as you would expect, want to see the Class 2 cost estimate, and that's really a key decision point for them. Next slide. We have been going through this process of doing due diligence with prospective customers. We can do the same process with Truckee, so they can start understanding, asking really any question about the project, because again, we would expect all of our members or any external parties to do their due diligence and see if it makes sense for their community or their entity to come into the project, and if it's a good fit for both. So we have looked at an approach of a conditional approval. That is one way to go about it, where an entity can go ahead and agree to come in subject to certain events occurring. And this is just one approach. And that is just something that we are exploring with entities. Some are just doing due diligence over the next several months and then making a decision at the end of the year. And with that, we'll leave it open for questions. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this evening.
Great. Thank you very much. A lot of good info there. Yeah. All right. So, do you mind, just going up to the mic and then the those listening online can, and then Mason was just gonna mill around and listen and and then be ready. Mason and team.
I'm just curious, $89 per megawatt hour for nuclear, what is coal, solar, wind, just to, and then what does, 77 megawatts power, just for, I mean, I have no idea.
Question on the,
Thanks.
I'll leave the 77 megawatts equivalent on the household for one of my phone a friend on that one in a second. So one of you guys can get that one for me. So the cost comparison for just various generation resources. Sure. Yeah. So the Red Mesa project, solar project, great capacity factor. That project, $37 a megawatt hour. And that's flat pricing without an escalator. So that gives you some cost comparison. Yeah, and well, and that's sort of the difficulty of just doing these straight cost comparisons, because really when we talk about it and think about it with our members, is how does that $89 fit into your overall portfolio of resources? And does it work or not? Because at the end of the day, you're going to end up paying for one way or the other to have reliable energy from your, I mean, we can't just think that we're going to be able to do $37 solar and everything's going to be fine. When we look at doing batteries, one of the projects we were looking at with batteries, and this sort of a 4-hour battery is around $79. So, I mean, it's really difficult to do these equivalents, and I think it's somewhat dangerous because it sets maybe the wrong perspective on, oh, well, it's going to be so much cheaper that we do it that way. We haven't really talked about land issues, but we have to be cognizant of doing that from the development standpoint. I mean, that Red Mesa is 67 megawatts. It's on like almost 400 acres. So there's going to be trade-offs with any resource. That's why we're not saying one's necessarily better than the other. I think the way that I would look at it is how it fits in overall costs in a portfolio. That helps. Yep.
I'll take the energy production question about what does 77 megawatts do for you? So 1 megawatt powers about 750 homes. So if you run that math through, it's just short of about 60,000 homes for 77 megawatts. So if you're doing 6 modules, right? So, 350 to 400,000 homes would be powered by a power plant like this. You said you had other questions. Okay. Go ahead and ask and we'll repeat it here. So you have to run up and back.
Okay, there we go.
I have a few questions. I wondered what your source of fuel is, and is that a reliable thing when there's several things popping up there? Or is that something you have to worry about? When you talk about costs here, I would wonder how the low life cost of electricity for geothermal would be, which is also round clock source, and it's pretty close at hand here. How does that compare?
Let me interrupt you. Let me do one question at a time because I got to repeat it back and then have the answer. So let's start over. Right. The first question was. Okay. Okay. So right. So for the record and those who can't hear, the question is, how reliable is the source of fuel and what is the source of fuel for nuclear power plants? So there are global supplies of uranium that are available. Some are from our allies, some are from inside the United States, some are from countries that are not our allies. There is a sufficient supply globally to produce enough uranium for all the existing about 450 reactors in the world today. Some of those will come offline and we hope to replace them. So we don't see a fuel supply issue in the short term. Additionally, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is an agency of the United Nations, that does two major things. One is it goes to look after the North Koreas and the Irans of the world to say, you know, you're not friendly actors, and so we're concerned about you developing nuclear weapons and so on. They go and try to run those inspection programs. The other thing they do is they help to promote peaceful nuclear energy programs. The old motto until recently was called Atoms for Peace, which was the whole idea. So the IAEA has created a fuel bank. So through all of the member states, 150 or so member states of the United Nations, they agreed to create a uranium fuel bank in Kazakhstan, which holds about 45% of the supply currently of the world's uranium. There's more to be found, likely, but that's what's currently known. We, the U.S., have a good relationship with the Kazakhs, and we receive some of our fuel from them, from the raw uranium. It is global. It's in Kazakhstan. It's in the U.S. It's in Niger. It's in the Congo. I mean, it's on every continent almost. So we don't see a fuel supply issue. The fuel for NuScale, for the original fuel loads for the carbon-free power project, will come from Framatome, which is a French originated company, but the fabrication of the fuel pellets will occur here in the U.S. and be transported. So, okay. So second question.
Second question was relative to the geothermal.
This might be you.
Sources of electricity that are being developed in Nevada. What's the LCOE for that?
Sure. Yep. And so, yeah, I can repeat the question is, for geothermal resources, and let's say the ones that are developed in Nevada, it could be sort of anywhere. What's the relative LCOE for those resources? So we have recently sort of tested the market, went through an RFP process for geothermal, looking at resources in Nevada, in Utah, and the range that we got was roughly $70 to $120, maybe even $130. But again, it's not really probably an apples to apples comparison. You know, we're really interested in looking at geothermal. So I'm not saying anything negative about it, but that pricing is based on I'm trying to remember if it was 20 years or 25 years. And, you know, there's pros and cons, and, you know, that's based on an RFP process. So I can't say that we've locked down pricing. You know, sometimes when we go through RFP processes, the pricing looks real good at first. And then once you sort of unpack everything and get it packaged in a way that's acceptable, it ends up being a little bit higher.
And then if we could, just for the record, we'll state the public comments name. Then we can, John Sorensen, and ma'am, what was your? Okay, John Sorensen and Tracy Cuneo. Got it. Thank you very much.
NuScale has said that it's not going to start construction on the Idaho project unless the power is 80% subscribed for. And we understand that that target has to be hit by February 2023, or NuScale has to reimburse the U.S. subscribers for their costs. We also understand that at the end of 2022, only about 25% was subscribed for the UN members, which is actually down, I believe, from the previous subscription amounts, because some subscribers have taken advantage of the off-ramps as our PDP did, the off-ramps that are in the project. So I actually listened to the second quarter earnings call that NuScale had, and there was a question from one of the panelists about what percentage of power was subscribed for the Idaho project. And new scale, sorry, but are you getting this on any of the audio? None of your comments are being put on audio right now unless you come to the audio. You want me to start all with it? If you want it to be part of the
Record? Yeah, yeah,
then it would be.
I would go to the microphone.
yeah, yeah. Kind of a long question. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So, I was saying that NewScale has said that it's not going to start construction of the Idaho project unless 80% of the power is subscribed for. And we understand it's, that target has to be hit by February of 2023, or or it must reimburse the UAMPS subscribers for their costs incurred. We also understand that at the end of 2022, only about 25% of the power was subscribed for by UAMPS members, which I believe is actually down from previous higher subscription numbers, because some UAMPS members, like our PUD, took advantage of the periodic off-ramps from the project that are built into the project agreement. So I listened to NewScale's second quarter earnings call in which was in August, where an analyst asked how UAMPS is doing in boosting the subscription numbers, and NewScale gave a kind of non-answer answer, saying that UAMPS is working hard to increase the number of subscribers and the amounts of their subscriptions. And I assume that that's why you all are here tonight. So I'm asking UAMPS, what percentage of the power is currently subscribed for? And also, for what reasons did other UAMPS subscribers take the off-ramp? And also, if the 80% target is not reached by February, will the project ever be built? I have a bunch of other questions as well, but try that one.
So I can start with those three. I think there were just three specific questions. And sorry, the first question was, the current subscription rate, sorry. The current subscription rate is just over 25%. The second question was, what was the reasoning for some of the UAMPS participants exiting the project several years ago? So I think what you're referring to is the exit of several participants in the summer of 2020. So during the summer of 2020, we were still in the process of negotiating the DOE cost share award that was ultimately entered into in October of 2020. So I believe the exiting participants you're referring to actually exited prior to having that cost share award in place. And that was the reason they gave for exiting. The third question was whether or not the project will move forward past February if yeah. Sure. Yep. Just want to make sure that I'm getting the questions accurately. So what happens if the project doesn't get to 80%? Our participating members have a standing resolution. If $89, once we do the cost estimate review this fall, isn't achieved, or if we don't have 80% of the project subscribed, their resolution is that they will terminate the project. That does not necessarily mean that the project doesn't move forward. As part of the reimbursement agreement with NewScale, We give over the project assets. So there is the potential that NewScale takes the project forward and moves it forward. I obviously can't speculate on, whether or not that's what they'll do, but just option-based analysis, those are options.
Great. Were there any other questions? Oh, we got it. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Hoping I could sit like the others, but let's do this at the my least preferred way of talking in front of groups. My name's Erin Delafontaine. I'm a Truckee resident. Cannot see when I'm wearing these. I want to just give a little bit of quick background for those of you who weren't here a few years ago. I know some of you were, as well as some of the board members. In November of 2017, the town of Truckee committed to a renewable energy resolution that committed them to achieving 100% renewable energy by 2030. Around that same time, people in the community learned of the UAMPS NewScale SMR project. And through a lot of research and attendance of workshops and board meetings and such, many of us came to the conclusion that we had, first, we do not consider nuclear renewable energy. It's carbon free, yes, but it's neither renewable nor clean with its nuclear waste. We had serious concerns about waste disposal. We had serious concerns about the costs and the history of nuclear in terms of costs and timelines being blown out of the water. I believe it was April of 2018. I could double check that. I have some notes here. Yes, April 4th, 2018. The board of directors directed staff, and I quote, to table the project indefinitely and look for renewable energy alternatives. And I guess what I'm trying to understand here is why we're looking at this again right now, because of some of the major concerns that we had and reasons why the PUD in our community was not interested in this project. Those matters have either just gotten worse or come to fruition. There was a 5.8 cents per kilowatt hour forecast. Now it's 8.9. There was a projected time for online availability of 2026. Now all modules not till 2030. And there is still no answer to the waste issue, though it was alluded to by one of the gentlemen. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but here's an article from Scientific American that just came out recently, and I will just say this real quick and then I'm done. As small modular nuclear reactors come closer to reality in the US, managing and disposing of their highly radioactive waste should be a national priority. 40 years after the passage of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, there is no clear path forward for siting, licensing, and construction of geological repositories for nuclear waste, according to a recent U.S. National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report. I'm not sure I had any questions in all of this, but if you could respond to some of those concerns and maybe I guess generally, I would just say, explain to me why we're looking at this again.
All right, thank you.
I kind of interpret that as a comment or question to the board, not the UAMPS members.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just think there's been a lot more information. I think we've got a really good team here to bring back more information. When we were back in 2017, we didn't have an informational session like this. I went to Utah and hung out with UAMPS back in 2016 or 17, came back really excited about the technology and just wasn't able to just really convey that information to the public. And then we had, basically a meeting to determine if we were buying into the project or not. So it was kind of, we put the cart before a horse. We need to educate the community, educate everybody ourselves on this technology. I think, my personal drive is we need to do something now about our power. We cannot do 100% renewable energy and power this town at night. And we need to figure out the base load power, where that's going to come from. I think regarding the waste, and the spent fuel, I think Chuck had it's stored on site. And one of my questions coming up is, how many gummy bears do we have to actually store on site for 60 years of the life of the power plant? And to me, that's on site here. So like Mason was saying, there's a lot of variables going on. There's a lot of variables. And when you look at I don't know how many acres the Mesa, Red Mesa project was, super awesome project, but that's a lot of land. That's a lot of dirt. And we're only talking maybe 10 to 15% for almost 10 times the power. So we're almost looking at a factor of 100 times if we're reducing it and then providing that kind of power. We're looking at almost 500 megawatts here for this power plant. So to me, I want to look at it again, because I want to educate the community, educate this board. I feel it's a very viable solution in our portfolio, our long-term portfolio, and it's carbon free. So I've wanted to say this for a long time. And we have, Krista, you say it all the time regarding, climate change. It's here, it's now, it's happening, it's not fake. And what are we doing about it now? Well, right now, we're still buying gas-powered energy. And how are we going to replace that? I got to replace that now. And the UAMPS team is doing an incredible job finding looking under all the stones, finding the power available to do that now and reliably. And can we replace a good portion of what we buy in gas and sometimes coal on the market, which we had to do earlier this year? We need to cut our carbon, and we need to do it ASAP. And how can we do that? Well, this is one very viable option. And that's why I really want to look at it again and really educate the community, which I'm really happy everyone is here. I was shocked initially. Why is everyone here? And then Chris reminded me, hey, we're talking about nukes again. And so we didn't do that before. And I really regret that. And we talked about, now we're doing an integrated, the IRP planning about the future. So I took your question, your comment, and I exploded with all my thoughts that I've been holding up for a long time since that 2017 decision. We just didn't do our due diligence and educate the community, and which is what we're trying to do now. Get all these questions answered, flushed out. Hopefully the majority of the community is on board for looking at real viable options to cut our carbon footprint in this town as soon as possible. So that's my 2 cents.
I am glad that you had the opportunity to find that up. No, I think it's important. I think it's important. I think this is, that's why we have these workshops and these meetings, because the board also, these are big, complex problems that are going to have complex solutions on which we are going to be able to disagree. And that's why we are doing this, so that we can work out what this community wants and what we need and what is possible. I think all of those are extremely important. And I think it's important for us to be honest with each other and say things like that. There's a lot of, within the environmental community, people who support nuclear and feel like it's a valuable tool in our climate change toolbox. I am not one of those. I still have a lot of questions about this project. Aaron nailed a lot of them for me, just questions about timelines and cost. It just seems to me in the history of nuclear science that there has never been a project that has come in on time and on budget, ever. Even with billions of dollars from, you know, the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, we still haven't managed to do that. And this particular project, it's the first of its kind, which kind of flies in the face of utilities everywhere. I mean, what is the saying? Utilities go where everybody has boldly gone before. That is our calling card. We are a very conservative segment of whatever the world, what we do. We are innately conservative because we know people are relying on us to turn the lights on, to keep their oxygen flowing, to, you know, all of the things. Our lives are based on electricity. So we don't tend to take risks. We don't, you know, our three-legged stool, rates, renewables, reliability. This doesn't check any of those boxes. I mean, it does theoretically,
Well, I
but
mean,
it's
that's
theoretical.
arguable, Chris. That's
Well, does
arguable.
one of these
The-
exist?
Well, we're talking about a reactor technology that's been around for a very long time. So what they've done like is just, you know, I like engineering as, okay, we just take proven technologies
Mhm.
and then put them together in a new fashion. And that's what they've done here.
I have a question about the casing, for example. The steam generator is in the casing with the reactor. What happens when you have to service the generator?
This is why.
These are a question, yeah.
No, it's a very good question. And so the steam generator is a helical coil set of tubes. That's all it is. And so water that is heated up from underneath from the fission process in the reactor core heats up the water that's around it, and that water rises naturally through, you know, convection. That's how it works. And it surrounds the helical coil steam generator tubes, and inside the tubes is a separate set of water. And that is converted to steam in the tubes, and then it goes out into the turbines, and it pressure, because of the pressure, turns the turbines, which turns to generators, which makes electricity. So fundamentally, that's how it works. And that's a technology we've been running for 60 years in this country, in the Navy and in commercial operations. So we have the same question, right? So historically or today, how do you deal with that? Our module disassembles. So to service the upper portions of the module, including the steam generator tubes, you disconnect the bottom of it and the fuel is in there. And so you're physically disconnecting the fuel assembly part of the module over to near the fuel bay, and then you can service all of the rest of it. So we've thought that through.
Okay, I was like, because that's you know, generators need to be serviced. We know
Yes,
this.
they do.
and
They need
NEMO
to, well,
keeps
they need
going
to be tested.
offline and we
Right,
need it.
right. You run eddy current testing to make sure that there isn't turbulence, which is caused by cracks or other flow accelerated corrosion or other elements that may have built up in the tubes, et cetera. Again, that's a very well-known science that we've been running for 60 years
Yeah, it was
globally.
when what prompted the question was seeing it in the casing with the reactor. I'm like, how do they
Yep.
get to that? It seems because things go wrong with generators all the time. You're right. It's old technology. It's our very first, how we powered everything, steam engines, but, and generated electricity, right, through steam. Okay, so I'll cross that one off. Thank you. Yeah. Please. No, I do not mind.
Short, I can repeat it. If it's longer, you can come up and voice it.
Well, I think it's short enough.
We'll see how I do.
Concerns that were raised by the NRC Committee on Reactors Safeguards when they were advising on the design certification. And as I understand it, the NRC put off consideration of their particular concern until you get to the project licensing phase, at which time they'll take a look at that. So I'm wondering if you can explain to us what that safety concern is and how you're going to deal with it, and also how dealing with it in the context of your project licensing procedure could impact the time it takes to get that license granted.
So I'm going to try and summarize that. But there's a key word that you used, and I want to make sure it's the right word that I'm responding to. And the word you used was safeguards. Is that the term you want to use? Mhm. Okay. Yep. Yeah, I am. So, okay. Yeah, so let me talk. So the question, if I can summarize this, and please help me if it needs to be adjusted. The summary of the question, I think, is what's the story? What's the story of the NRC pulling back on evaluating or looking at reactor safeguards issue for this project? And what happens when they do come back to it? And how does that get related to our license application when we actually go to license this thing? Is that fundamentally what you're asking? They'll come back to it. Right. Okay. So let me take a moment and talk about what safeguards is. Safeguards is related to the technology of the fuel and its physical disposition. So as an example, if you put that, don't put it up, but if you put the map back up, before you can take fuel and move it across the fence line onto the site, everything at the site has to be prepared for that. Security, the program has to be up and running. The guards have to be in place. The quality assurance program has to be up and running, and the audits preparing all the programs have to have been conducted, and the NRC has to say, yep, you guys have all the programs in place. The radiation protection program has to be up and running. The dosimeters, the testers have to be there. Everybody has to be trained, and so on and so on. So prior to the fuel being allowed to go onto the site, effectively, every program regulated by the NRC has to be up and running and approved by the NRC. So that's part one. Part two is the fuel technology itself. So safeguards actually relates to the intellectual property of the fuel. So you don't just take uranium and put some cladding on it and put it into a bundle and hope it works. Okay. There was a lot of material science and engineering built into getting that pellet to be exactly what it needs to be, like the gasoline in your car. The gasoline in your car is manufactured through a very specific set of standards. So is the uranium for these light water, pressurized water reactor designs. The intellectual property is essentially classified by the US government and close hold by only those who have need to know. So if we're taking the fuel from a company called Framatome and we're bringing it onto the site that is owned and operated by the Carbon Free Power Project, LLC, who are the people that have access to that information? And how is it controlled and managed? The answer to that question is not needed today, but absolutely will be needed before that fuel is allowed to cross over the site boundary. So it's actually not unusual for the NRC to hold off on a safeguards question while a project is in development, because they don't need to waste the time doing it if the project doesn't go forward or if it's delayed. So it's actually fairly common for the NRC to ask questions and then go, oh, wait, we're not there yet. We'll come back to that. Does that answer your question? Okay. I'm not familiar with the question. I've been at NuScale less than a year, and I'm not familiar with that particular NRC question, but there's not a safeguards question that I am technically aware of related to the steam generators, because in a pressurized water reactor, the water that is inside the steam generator tubes does not come in contact with the water that surrounds it. And so there are no irradiated particles inside the steam generator tubes. If there are, you've got a problem. Suddenly you have a boiling water reactor. So it's a different design. Certainly be happy to take that up as a question. Sure. And if it's okay, I'll feed it back to the board.
Please.
Certainly happy to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I would, thank you. Feeding it back to the board. Yeah.
I'm John Henry Byer, Truckee resident, full-time. And my comment isn't related to whether this particular project, nuclear project, is the one that should be pursued, but at the moment it appears to be the first one that has it's been certified by the NRC just this last January. So my comment really is more general about nuclear power. I was in the meetings back in 2017 here, where a lot of my friends and many others in town, everybody objected to looking at this project. And I had planned to say something at the time, and then I decided, well, there's no point. Why be hated by all my friends and everybody else in Truckee for saying we need to pursue new nuclear technology advancements? Because I think that ultimately, long-term, to address climate change, we're going to need nuclear. This evening, we've had George Griffith talk. I want to mention another Griffith, Saul Griffith. I think most of us know Saul Griffith. He's co-founder and chief scientist at Rewiring America. He's trying to get us off burning fossil fuels for electricity generation. And it was interesting. Late last year, I saw an interview of Saul Griffith, very brilliant guy, but it was an interesting talk where he gave his whole PowerPoint presentation, but it was done interactively with someone asking questions as he went along. So it wasn't just him giving his PowerPoint presentation. And he went through and he described where we're going to get the power, and he mentioned wind and solar and of course storage, which we need a lot more of if we're going to use those renewables and develop them. And finally, he basically was concluding, and the interviewer said to him, "What about nuclear?" And he said, "Oh, we're going to need that too." And I found it kind of interesting that he had not mentioned it during his talk. And yet he flat out said, "Yeah, we need that also." And I have the impression, well, I think we all know that nuclear power has really divided the environmental community. Even Saul Griffith saying, finally, yeah, we need it too, if we're going to really address climate change. We can't just give up on that whole technology of clean, or at least relatively clean power. And of course, so much of the environmental community says, oh my God, look, I understand why people are freaked out about nuclear. I certainly do. But what about the impact on humanity, our whole civilization worldwide, of climate change? That's pretty serious. First half of my career, well, my first degree was in physics, but then I switched to geophysics for my PhD at UC Berkeley, where right next to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where a lot of power development. Yes, and Oppenheimer was there. I have yet to see the movie, but I'm going to. But second half of my career, well, first half was in developing geothermal energy. Second half has been ways to address climate change, which I went after working out in industry. I came back, I went back to Berkeley Lab for the second half of my career, and it was all developing technologies that help us to generate clean power one way or another, in all sorts of industries and everything. But it seems to be that nuclear is a crucial piece of that puzzle. And we have to do everything we can. There's no silver bullet in this. We have to develop all sorts of technologies, and they are being developed out there. But some technologies will work in some situations and not others. All depends, fine, if you're near the coast, fine. Nobody really wants to live near the big wind turbines. Really, putting them offshore is probably a good idea in many cases. And I've been right up under some of those immense wind turbines, the big ones. I wouldn't want to live near one, really and truly. So, and then we need, of course, lots of transmission lines, because if we're going to build new solar installations, new wind installations, and of course, power from a nuclear project has to get onto the grid too. But so we all have all sorts of technologies and things we know we need to do, but they got to get done. And yes, I agree with all the concerns and issues you brought up. Storage, yeah, the United States has to get serious about storage of nuclear waste. And there are other nuclear technologies that do, in fact, people are working on that probably produce less waste. I mean, if we could do it with thorium reactors, but that's a long way off, as opposed to uranium. So, I'm not saying yay or nay on this particular project, but I'm saying we're going to need nuclear. And I think you people are really brave to bring it up again after the reception you got back in 2017. Honestly, I was amazed to see you considering it. So in that regard, I think you're doing the right thing. Yeah. The power we're burning, right now, it's coming a lot from natural gas, of course. And yeah, some coal, unfortunately. So my comments are general, obviously, but nuclear's got to be part of the puzzle. I do believe that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, just really wanted to say thanks for sharing your concerns, your questions, your support, or if you're not, still, that's why we're here. That's why we're having this workshop, to hear from you all. Thank you.
I guess we've kind of gone into the comment period. Because I have to leave, so I wanted to comment. I am Tracy Cuneo, full-time resident, 27 years. My background is I'm a professional licensed electrical engineer, and I know about large commercial construction. That's what I was in, not the electronic side. If anybody knows anything about construction, when you do a large project, and I've never, ever seen anything on the $9 billion, there are very few projects that are that large. They always come in overpriced, and they always come in way past the timeline that they were supposed to. And something that's just to try, I understand the questions, but that's just part of construction. And especially when you're doing such a new forefront technology, it just takes time. And I think what Jeff said was so on point, that you have to start now. We should have started in 2017 because it's going to take time. We don't know how long it's going to take, but we want to be in line to get this power. And also, nuclear is the only carbon-free baseload source. We in Truckee need a baseload source. We could have all the wind and all the solar, but at night and on stormy storms, we need a baseload power. So I'm all in favor for it. Thank you so much for bringing it back up as a topic. And thank you guys for coming in and educating us. It was fascinating.
Great. Thank you. Oh, we got Deidre. Yes, thanks for going to the mic. So we can get it all on record.
So I want to give a big thank you to the PUD board for this resource planning exercise and for opening this conversation to the community. This is exactly what a utility owned by the community with a citizen board elected by the community should be doing, but that has not always been the case. So this is a welcome change, and thank you very much. Let me say that I do wonder about the optics of starting this exercise off with this particular topic, which has probably been the one that has most upset this community in recent history. But that was your decision. Let me also be clear. I am not constitutionally opposed to nuclear power. I would be happy to have another, a non-fossil fuel, low carbon energy source, so long as it is safe, economical, can be built quickly, and doesn't involve a radioactive waste problem. Now, at some point in the future, small modular nuclear reactors may fit those criteria. I don't see that it does at the moment. I'm trying to keep an open mind. I also think that we are overly concerned about baseload power. Many people believe that baseload power is an outmoded concept, that we are going to have to move toward, and that we are moving toward, a kind of patchwork of different sources and management of our energy sources, as well as our demand side, all mediated by a lot of new terrific software. We're moving toward a very different kind of concept of what utilities do. And I don't know that we have adequately yet, maybe as part of this exercise, we will take a look at some of the other things that are less traditional that we can do. I also have a question for UAMPS and also for our board. We have what is probably the nation's largest geothermal energy resource just to the east of us in the Great Basin of Nevada. NV Energy, which, as you all know, transmits our power, has asked Nevada regulators to approve 2 geothermal power proposals that would provide it with 140 megawatts of new capacity for the next 25 years at a flat rate of $69 per megawatt hour for in one case, and for the other project, it's $70. Both are substantially cheaper than the $89 per megawatt power, which is the current estimate and counting for power from the NuScale Idaho project. And these geothermal proposals, for those interested in baseload power, provide baseload power from a proven and currently in use technology. So I have to ask, have we thought big about investigating this type of cheaper, safer, less speculative alternative to the NuScale project? And what are we doing with the resource that's right next door to us?
I can feel that. That yes, we are exploring those sorts of opportunities. Geothermal is on the table. We have discussed it with UAMPS. UAMPS is investigating geothermal. We are investigating it outside of UAMPS as well. And I think that's part of what this fall, this series of workshops where we're discussing generation and procurement. This is the first of a series of workshops. And as far as timing goes, I think a lot of us are like, if we're gonna bring up an uncomfortable topic, let's just do it first. let's get it out of the way so we don't have to, we don't have to fear it forever. We just tackle it and get through the conversation and digest it and then discuss it, respectfully and honestly, then that's what we're trying to do.
If you don't mind, Director Finn, President Bender, I'd like to kind of piggyback on that comment. And so we will have opportunities in future workshops this fall here in the coming weeks on different categories of energy sources and procurements that we want to consider in our portfolio as we start to understand the integrated resource plan a little more. As Director Finn has stated, both through the UAMPS membership, who have offered solicitations of interest in geothermal energy resources. We've done it outside the UAMPS membership. Unfortunately, at this point, they're not kind of scalable to what we need to secure in terms of our overall portfolio. We have opportunities of somewhere in the 3 megawatt range, which is 10% of our, or a little under 10% of our energy portfolio as it stands now. the timeline for some of these construction projects are very similar to the new scale project. And the price point, as Mason pointed out earlier, we're looking at anywhere between the low $70 per megawatt up to $115, $120 a megawatt. And there may be opportunities in the future because we are an NV transmission dependent entity in that's in that kind of pool, so to speak, in transmission, that we have other opportunities. But at this point, we're kind of pursuing everything that comes up on our horizon. And we'll report out to that in the next workshops of where we're at with some of the other energy generation opportunities.
Exactly, where we can ask questions about those, about timelines and about pricing and about all the things that we're talking about tonight with the new scale.
Will you be able to give us a schedule of the topics? I mean, for us in the community that are really interested in this?
I imagine so.
If it's available, I certainly think we all appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that request, and staff will put out a schedule. We'll convene with some of our team and the availability of resources. We wanted to take the opportunity on the availability of both the Idaho Lab and New Scale representatives to come out here to Truckee. We'll definitely put together a schedule as we kind of dovetail into the integrated resource plan report out as well.
There are still questions, but I don't know that Deirdre, did you still have?
An overarching question that I've always wondered about, which is.
Yeah.
I've always wondered why there are no large investor-owned utilities which have all kinds of deep technical capability to evaluate power project opportunities that have subscribed for the Idaho's SMR project. Why is this project relying, and has, for as long as we've known about it, why is it relying on a bunch of small municipal utilities, which presumably have less financial capability, right, to invest in this project? Where are the other big investors, and why haven't they jumped in? Maybe you're talking to them now, but they certainly haven't before. We've been the only ones. It's always seemed really strange to me.
I had that question too.
So for maybe a little more context, some of the investor-owned utilities are looking at other projects. For example, there's another technology, TerraPower, that's moving forward with a project at a retiring coal plant in Wyoming. That's being done by Rocky Mountain Power, investment-owned utility. There's been TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a entity somewhat like UAMPS, provides power to municipalities throughout Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky. They're looking at doing a new reactor project, small modular reactor project. So there are other large utilities looking at other projects, SMR projects. The reason why they're doing it are the same reasons we've talked about here tonight. They see how it fits in the overall portfolio mix. And something that is interesting to look back on historically, and public power had a history of doing big, ambitious projects in the West. We haven't done that in 40 years. We haven't had to. And so when you look back in the history of doing large infrastructure projects, public power has stepped up and taken a leadership role and done that in the past. There are other reasons why investor-owned utilities don't move forward with large capital projects. A lot of them tend to be related to their relationship with their regulator and in often cases, it's not a particularly good one. So there's no real ability for them to move that forward. I mean, so there are, there are reasons why, and public power, when you look back, some of the massive infrastructure projects in the West were done by public power. I spent a lot of time with older public power individuals who have told me that. And part of the issue that we're facing in the new resource landscape right now is we haven't done big projects, whether it's nuclear or something else. We haven't done it. And now we have those legacy assets retiring. The market's been soft for 10 years. That didn't stimulate any new resource development. So we're starting to feel some of the pains in the market from market spikes and pricing. So, yeah, we could sort of sit back and do nothing, but that's not the approach that UAMPS has ever taken. We're always going to move this forward very methodically and make sure it works for the members. But as far as, I'm not that concerned about following the lead of an investor-owned utility. If we look in the West, there's not a particularly good track record of falling behind IOUs. I mean, we talk about PG&E here, so my comments on that.
I think another piece to your question, and Mason's answer was very good, but another piece is also transmission access. So electricity really only goes so far, right? You're not going to produce power in Maine and ship it to California. By the time it gets here, it's not worth what you put into it. And part of that is actually policy and economics. So for example, for this site in Idaho, to get the power physically, and by the way, you can't actually prove that that electron that you bought and used here in Truckee came from that specific spot. It's like water. How do you find that water molecule? But so it's the same concept, right? So with that background, to get the power from Idaho National Laboratory to Truckee takes what? How many miles of transmission line and how many hops across different owners of the transmission line? And guess what they do? They add a fee. So the farther you send it, the more it costs, both physically and also economically. So I think, I don't know, but I think the answer to your question is for investor-owned utilities, and we're talking NuScale in particular, separate from UAMPS, is talking to almost every large investor-owned utility in the United States, both public power and both public and investor-owned. Those that do own and operate nuclear power plants and some that do not. And so we have a tremendous amount of interest. I think the reason is partially timing in the markets. For investor-owned utilities, natural gas was good, fast, and cheap. Right? The price of gas sunk. You could put up a gas plant for $1.5 billion. That would be a gigawatt of energy, and it takes 30 people to run it, and it took you 18 months to build it. Perfect. Until you start talking about carbon and fuel volatility on price. And so that was a market 10, 15 years ago that was great for the investor-owned utilities. It's not anymore. So it's a new market. So they are talking to not just us, they're talking to our competitors. They're also talking to the large scale power plants. So we are a small modular reactor. There are what are called gigawatt class or standard size nuclear power plants. Westinghouse, GE in the US, for example. They're all hot and heavy in conversations with these utilities. So I think one of the major answers as to why the big IOUs in the West are not involved in this is transmission. Cost of transmission, difficulty with it, and grid capacity, right? There's another challenge. You have a grid that's been built that has so much capacity. Now you're going to go add 0.5 gigawatt to it. Can the transmission system actually handle that? And well, in some cases it can't. And so you have to expand the transmission system. So now the investor-owned utility says, well, what's that going to cost me? Permitting, construction costs, line maintenance, all that. They have to build that into their costs. So there are a lot of pieces to getting electrons from production to use. And so I think the answer to your question is to go the distance from Idaho to here is hard and expensive. And I think that's really what's behind it. And as we've talked about, utilities are conservative. So why would I get tied up into that when I can build a plant here or there? So that's why for us, a lot of interest is in replacing existing coal plants. Our customers are coming and saying, I've got a coal plant in Arizona or in Wyoming or wherever it is. What can you guys do new scale? What can you do for us to replace that plant? Because the transmission system's already there, the interconnections are there, the switch yard is there, the water is there, the road infrastructure is there, et cetera. So this is, you're coming out of the blue and saying, nothing exists here. Let's go build a power plant. Let's go transmit those electrons. Okay, that gets complicated. And we've done this time and time again in the country. We've done it nationally for decades, building nuclear plants, building coal plants, building gas plants. I live in the Tennessee Service District. I live outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. I actually live about 12 minutes drive from TVA's operational headquarters for all the power plants. I worked for them as a consultant on and off for decades. They've got an incredible system, and it's really hard, they would say, okay? And they're a public utility. So it's really challenging to say, we're going to go throw on a whole new set of generation. As an example, their chief nuclear officer earlier this year at a conference I attended made a public statement, a speech, and he talked about all the things that Mason talked about. He talked about this portfolio of a variety of different energy sources they're adding to their system. And when he talked about, we're going to put solar up, we're going to put up 10,000 megawatts of solar. And then he paused and he said, but it's really only about 3,000 megawatts of electricity. So you have to deal with all of that, because at one moment in time, you might get 10,000 megawatts. And at another moment in time, you might get 0, but on average, you're getting 30 or 3,000, 30%. So the utilities have to factor all of that in. And when you're going from something like a geothermal, which frankly, I love, it's the coolest thing, okay? But typically renewables are local and they're generally smaller, right? You can build these big gas plants, or you can build big nuclear plants or SMRs that you scale up. But renewables either take a tremendous amount of land, or they're relatively small and they are intermittent, as we talked about. So the utility has a responsibility to its rate base and to its customers to say, we will provide you these lights all the time, whenever. And it's difficult to put everything in place to make all that possible. In my opinion, nuclear should be part of everybody's answer. Are there challenges? Absolutely. But there are with every energy source. What I tell people is, when you turn on that light switch, something bad already happened. Okay, you can go to Google and type in wind turbine fire and click on videos, and you can see video after video after video of wind turbines on fire, dropping melted plastic onto the farm ground and toxic smoke going into the air. There's no clean energy. The challenge that we all have as humans on the planet is to find clean, reliable, safe energy that's affordable, exactly as you described. So I think the challenge for the utilities is to say, how do we do that? How do we do that here? What renewable choices do we have that are local that work? Is geothermal part of that? Great. If it's not, for example, where I live, it's not. There is no geothermal in Tennessee, but we get a lot of water. So we do dams and we do hydro. Great. So I think the answer to kind of a lot of these questions is really where we started at the beginning today with Mason's presentation. And if you go back and look at that list on that slide deck, the carbon-free power project is less than 50% of all of those projects they currently have planned. It's part of a larger scale attempt to mitigate climate change, reduce carbon production, but still have reliable and resilient energy. So there are so many factors in making all of these lights work, and our EV cars get charged and our phones get charged, that these poor people up front have to make those tough decisions, and they're difficult. But a lot of it is physics. And the other big piece of it really is economics.
Yeah, I think the bigger piece is economics. It's how do we make it work? And just to echo all of the things you just said, that every community's power mix is going to look different. And it's not it shouldn't be something that is super judgmental. You know, we have a community here. We are uniquely situated. We do have geothermal close by. We have biomass that is still, you know, we can make our communities more safe physically. We can provide local economic drivers. We can, you know, help reduce our fuel load around us. And yeah, it's also an expensive resource, because we haven't been investing in these sorts of systems in recent history, you know, since the 70s. But they're here, and it's time for us to be creative and thoughtful and educated. So yeah, what it looks like for this community, I hope by the end of this fall, we will be able to start making some of those decisions.
Can I say
Sorry.
something? No, I'm just joking. I appreciate the public and the interaction and our professionals here today. I want to say one thing, and and Jeff hit it on the head when he started off by saying we are starting with the toughest discussion, but we are starting our integrated resource plan and everything that's been talked about here today. All the resources, all the different technologies, we need to be educated. We need those technologies to be presented to us. We need to understand how they're going to fit in this community. We need to understand how they're going to fit cost-wise. There's a lot of things going on here. So and Aaron, I appreciate your question. Why are we here again today? That's why. This community, this state is demanding more electricity. That will continue to increase. EVs, 100% EV sales by what, 2030? You know, there is no point in saying that what we have today is what we need tomorrow. We need to look at under every stone. And that is exactly what we're doing today, is we're starting the discussion with a challenging topic, but we're starting it because we need to start somewhere looking at carbon-free baseload. So I appreciate the comments. I still have concerns. I still feel like this country can do way better as far as nuclear waste and its disposal and recycling. But I also need to stand up here and look at all of you and decide what's the best for this community. And so there are going to be tough decisions coming from this board in the next 6 to 12 months on how we deal with what's coming. We're staring down the barrel of a huge jump in our electrical demand and the demand for clean energy. Those two are not they are on different parallels, and we need to find a way to make them meet satisfactorily for our customers. So we have to look at every option. So
Nice. Yeah, I mean, do you want?
All right. I get to finish it off, or, you know. No, thank you so much to our presenters for being patient with all of our questions. I do remember that meeting. I was actually at that meeting where the SMRs were discussed, and it was a very passionate project. And to tell you the truth, I was curious to see if we would still get the same passion at this one. So thank you for coming with all your questions, your comments, and it is important to listen to all different sides. We have a variety of community members, from the frontline workers to the, you know, owners of investment companies and everyone in between. We have longtime locals that are very passionate about the environment. And we also have realists who are saying, we don't want to go down this path, but it's important to consider. So I'm happy to listen to all sides of it. Always try to bring in everybody to come to consensus. You may not make everybody happy, but it's a give and take where we will all have to give, we will all have to take, and try to land somewhere where we're comfortable. I like the geothermal that we are pursuing that. And I, you know, so I don't go on too long, I just appreciate all the feedback and look for additional feedback for our future presentations. So thank you.
Okay.
We've got-
A little bit confused.
Is there any chance you can go to the mic, please? Thank you.
I'm a little bit confused on timing here. We're engaged in what sounds like it's going to be a quite long process of looking at a variety of alternatives, and so that the PUD can develop a long-term energy resource plan. We have a nuclear project that seems to have a February 2023 deadline. So we may not even have this to consider. How are we thinking about what, what's the thinking here?
I guess I'm a little confused. Everything is, I mean, you can buy in, I think in February, they have their 80%, but that's not related, a requirement to us. And then our integrated resource plan, I think, is going to be finished relatively soon in thinking weeks here. So I guess I'm not, from my point of view, I'm not seeing a time crunch here. That's why we're having these workshops. We're going to talk about the integrated resource plan. We're going to talk about the different technologies and how that all fits.
So are you saying that we can buy into the UAMPS Idaho project, even if UAMPS pulls out of the project because it has not produced the 80% subscription?
I don't think we have a motion on the floor to do any such thing. I think right now, today is a workshop to just receive information.
I understand that. I'm just trying to understand.
I don't
why
think
are-
that
yeah.
conflict actually exists. So we have time to buy in, to not buy in, to if the project goes forward or if it doesn't go forward, there's still a lot of unknowns in the future that we,
I see. So you're thinking that even if the February deadline means that the UAMPS, that this project as a UAMPS project doesn't go through, that it will continue perhaps as some other opportunity to participate in the same project in the future.
So let me
Should
help
we want
with,
to do that?
if I might help with some clarification here. So the integrated resource plan that we're currently in the midst of, we've gone through with our consulting engineers and reviewed the preliminary first phase sort of product out of that plan. There's a lot of assumptions made in that plan, just preliminary assumptions to kind of a baseline starting point. Staff is working with our engineering consultants to correct some of those assumptions or review some of those assumptions and continue to build out a plan that should be available relatively soon. We're talking in the next couple of months. UAMPS is our opportunity through this project. UAMPS has, as Mason pointed out, a standing resolution within the UAMPS board to meet a couple of milestones. And those are kind of the go, no go milestones that he reviewed earlier. For us as a member agency, we would need to either come up with some sort of conditional resolution to subscribe to the project as part of our long-term plan with potentially some off-ramps available further on down the line, or after these workshops and a review of our integrated resource plan, the board of directors, the community decides that this isn't a project we want to participate in, and we don't move forward with it. What we're attempting to provide here is an opportunity for the board and the community to have discussions, one, on the projects that are available. This is a series of workshops. And two, when it's available here soon, the integrated resource plan will show a map, a forecast of projected energy load, new demands, things like the EV charging penetration, some of the kind of expected new load growth because we're along the 80 corridor, some of the electrification trends that are out there, and we project our load profile over the next decade or two. We'll also present what energy resources we are currently in contract with through either PPAs or equity ownership in these. Some of the assumptions include expansion of those generation projects. Some of them also include potential projects outside of UAMPS that may become available. What we need to look at is the package deal and understand from the board so staff can either present the opportunity for a conditional resolution to join the project or not, but making sure that it comes from an informed perspective of what we are looking to face over the next decade or so. there's a lot of energy resource uncertainty in the Western region. And we'll get into that when it comes to the integrated plan and what is out in front of the district as a public power provider for this community. This is just the first of a series of projects to help inform on one of the opportunities we have to consider. It was a long-winded response. I apologize, but it was, I hope that cleared some of the timing of it. You know,
Yeah.
it's without a doubt, there is a confluence of many things, factors coming in together in a short period of time here. And there's other larger factors out there in terms of resource adequacy and getting into projects for long-term purchase power agreements to help make sure we have that rates and reliability for this community moving forward. We're also, you know, on the precipice of the board giving direction on in terms of energy rates over the next several years for this community as well.
I just keep thinking education, you know, that's the point of this workshop. We need to ask the questions and
Yeah.
learn
And I
about
think, yeah,
it.
I think
and-
all of the board members
Yeah.
needed to be at least on the same page with what we understand about this project, so we can discuss it amongst ourselves in a more accurate and thorough way, not necessarily tonight, but moving forward that, you know, because this is really, it's a board discussion. It's a board, you know, this is to educate the board at mostly and,
Well,
you
and
know, and
community.
the community and to do it in a way that, you know, invites participation.
Right.
And, you know, so I think
And as Kim reminded us, it's not an action item.
it
And
is
thank-
not an action item. It is an educational workshop tonight.
Right,
The
yes.
first of a series.
Correct. Yeah.
So we have lots to chew on.
That it's 8:29.
That's-
If you don't mind, President Bender, I wanted to finish what I wanted to also thank the community members for coming and participating and giving feedback. I too was here at the board meeting in 2017. And, you know, whether it's, I heard the term brave for having this presentation again, I think it's necessary. It's not an act of bravery or courage to have a discussion about something we need to have a discussion with as a community. And so I appreciate the feedback. And, you know, we are a publicly owned utility that's serving as stewards of the public interest, public funds, and the public's future. And so it's important that we consider, as Director Friend said, having some of the difficult discussions in terms of our long-term plan to make sure that as each of us move away from our roles here at the district over the years, that we have, as Mason mentioned, the legacy projects that make sure we have sustainable and reliable power for this community. So I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're at a comfortable point in silence now and conclusion of this one item, number 15, the workshop. So thank you, everyone. That was very productive, educational, informative, action-packed.
And I think as we get more information from the questions that you would
Yeah.
send us, we'll
Thank you.
hopefully make those available too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Might I recommend a short break?
Absolutely.
Okay. Shall we say?
10, 5's rough, 10's good.
Good job.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's good. All right, we're back after our extended 10 minutes. And that's okay. We are now on to workshop item number 16, strategic plan update. Community circles. Pam.
Thank you.
Oh,
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. So we're going to do a brief overview of what's coming next week. Yes, very brief. It's going to be very fast. But on the heels of this great discussion tonight, just like each of you said, You talk, we listen, together we act. And so starting Sunday night, we're going to have 7 different presentations. And Shauna put on the dais for each of you. Yes, Kim has it holding up. The goal at the end of this presentation is, President Bender, if you would ask each of your colleagues which workshops you're going to attend, so we know where you'll be when. Okay. Tonight, Brian and I want to do a very brief, again, overview of what to expect as far as process at these workshops. So as I said, there are 7 meetings scheduled. The first kickoff meeting will be here at the PUD for Donner Lake Armstrong track from 3 to 4:30. And the way we've advertised these is telling everyone, if you can't make your neighborhood meeting, come to any of them. So be sure that you encourage that as well. And then, as I said, at the end of this presentation, we're going to ask you to commit to the best you can, which workshops you're going to attend. So now let's look at the format for each meeting. As you walk into each of the facilities, there will be 10 round tables, so community circles. And there may only be 2 filled, but we're going to be prepared. And there's going to be a fun, upbeat feeling. We're going to have music, beverages and cookies, bites of desserts. And what's really important is we're going to start with brief introductions. So we'll introduce board members, staff, and then we're going to have in each community circle, the participants, the community members, introduce each other in their community circle at their table, quickly just saying their name and how long they've lived in Truckee. So we have 4 initiatives. We have an hour and a half. Each initiative is going to be given 15 minutes. So it's not a lot of time. We have a very specific PowerPoint that we've put together. Thanks a lot to Stephen, Brian, Alex. It's been a team effort. And I'm very excited about the quality of this product. So for each initiative, there will be a description of the history and an educational piece that Brian will do when he's present, or Stephen will do when Brian isn't present, for each of the 4 initiatives. So everyone's going to hear history, education. And then secondly, we're going to have tabletop discussions. And the questions, I have some examples that I'll show you, but it's going to get the community talking. So the we talk, you listen, or we talk, you listen, whatever it is. And together we act. We really want to have that prototype throughout the entire hour and a half. With 3 of the initiatives, we will have a Slido question where everyone will use their phones, just like we all have together, to obtain data, so that you will actually have data after this community presentation. And all of this will be very fast-paced, genuine, and we will be providing interpreters that will be at every single one of these sessions. What we'd like to ask you for your roles is if you can arrive 15 minutes early and help us assist with meeting and greeting of community members, because you're all really good at that and you have great smiles, so we really want your assistance. At the beginning, as I said, you'll be introduced, and if it's a larger group, I'll ask you to stand. Your key role is just like you did tonight, listen and learn. What do you hear? You know, bring something like you always do to take some notes, but you'll hear key things about these topics that you'll be able to apply as you have continued discussions. And then, as I said, you're great emissaries for the PUD, and have some fun too. Because we want the community to have a relaxed feeling that these are community circles where everyone's equal and that we really want their opinions expressed. The initiatives will be presented in the order that you see here. So we'll start with net carbon reduction, then go to service reliability and safety, local watershed stewardship, and community broadband, saving that one for last. And the reason is the community broadband, you all said that we're at kind of a crossroads and we need to know what the community wants. And so I'll share with you how we're going to do that. The net carbon reduction, we did not do a Slido for, but the tabletop discussions, and remember, Brian will do a rich history and education, like what is net carbon reduction? Starting with that, not assuming that every community member will know what that means. After Brian's slide and going through the history of net carbon reduction, why you chose that as an initiative, what we're going to be faced with decisions at the PUD, then we'll have the first discussion item, which is what net carbon reduction opportunities are the most appealing to you? And the examples we're giving is procuring more clean electric resources, energy efficiency programs, investing in conservation, education, and our own behavior change. And Brian's going to talk more about that. Then if you picture, we have these 10 tables with community members. I'm going to ask one person to be a facilitator at the table, and they're going to have this discussion. And they will have worksheets so that they can keep notes. Okay, so we'll have that data as well. What were the key things we heard people say? If we have smaller groups rather than 100, we'll be able to have them share out, key points. And we just have to see who shows up and how this is facilitated. Then for net carbon reduction, the second discussion topic is, should the PUD set goals in advance of regulatory requirements, and at what cost? And Brian will give some background on that question and discussion, and will lead people into that discussion topic. So that's going to be very interesting, both of those, for what the public says. Service reliability and safety will have a Slido. And remember, there will be a slide that has background in education for each one of these initiatives. And then there will be a tabletop discussion. The Slido comes after the tabletop discussion, but we wanted to share tonight what the metrics will be that you'll see. Not only the outcomes from the tabletop discussions will you have access to, but this Slido for service reliability and safety is understanding the costs of undergrounding now, because Brian is educating everyone about that, compared to other system reliability and safety improvement considerations. Is undergrounding still a priority for you? And they'll use their QR code, just like we did with Slido, and they'll vote either yes or no. Okay, and that will be cumulative over the 7 meetings. Next, local watershed stewardship. The education on this initiative, I think, is outstanding. And the tabletop discussion lets people really talk about what are some of their own personal priorities with local watershed stewardship. It's a really good discussion topic. And then the Slido is, does the community believe the PUD should expand our focus beyond groundwater supply, water quality, and conservation to engage and invest in overall watershed stewardship? And they're going to vote yes or no. Okay, remember that's after education, background, tabletop discussion, and then that repetition. And then finally, here's the community broadband. And again, Brian's giving the history of everything we've done. We're going to say we're at a crossroads. And the discussion topics really lead down the road of talking about these three options. So the three options that they're going to vote on, and they're going to vote for one, will also be what they'll discuss. So that's continue with partnerships with multiple internet providers to incrementally improve service, continue with partnerships and focus on existing state. Disadvantaged or underserved areas, seek funding for a community-wide broadband business plan with the goal of bringing assessment district vote for the community to pay costs. So we'll have everyone vote for one, and that's after they've discussed those options at their tabletops. Then finally, we're going to ask one overall general initiative question. And this will be the fourth metric that you'll get. If you had an additional $10 a month for board initiatives, how would you prioritize the PUD spending the money? And we want them to select their top three because you'll get a rank of this entire list. So you can see the first four are the initiatives, and then 5 is split equally amongst the initiatives. I don't want to spend $10 more a month. Okay, so that's going to be an interesting ranking, right? Call it a day. So we're really enthusiastic. Brian and I were at the Downtown Merchants Association this morning. They're so enthusiastic. Many of the owners of businesses are sending out emails with the information for signups. You'll see things in their windows. It was very, very encouraging. And the feedback we've been getting wherever we've been going in the community is people love the concept of community circles, and that, we're really going to listen to what they say. You talk, we listen, together we act. So what we'd like, President Bender, for you to poll the board so we can write down when you want to attend what workshops. The gold medal would really be if there could be 2 of you at each workshop. I don't know if that's possible with your schedules, but that would be fantastic. So President Bender, could you kind of find out from everyone?
Facilitate that.
Yes, could you please?
I already signed up for the process.
And if you could just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Oh, the numbers are up there.
The numbers are up,
Okay.
up here.
So Krista Finn's number 3.
Okay.
I can do 2 and 5.
Great.
I can do 6.
Okay. Fantastic.
I can do 6 as well.
Great.
Oh, darn it, I was gonna take that one.
Uh,
I can do the 7
Great.
and
Oh, session 7.
Yeah.
Right, that's
Yeah.
good, because there
Makeup.
will be people at that makeup session.
Uh,
So we need 1 and 4.
I was hoping to do 6 because I work during the day.
You can do 6.
Okay,
I can
thanks.
shift to something else. So we still need.
Number 1 and number 4.
Good. I'll work on both of those. Those days.
Or number 7.
2 already booked up.
Yeah, but we can always have 3. But we don't have anyone for number 1 and number 7. I mean, number 1 and number 4.
Kim said 7. Oh, yeah,
It's number
yeah,
1 and number 4. I'm sorry.
4.
We need 1 and 4.
Someone's birthday on one of those, so I'm not gonna volunteer for that.
Okay.
What about-
Anybody for Glenshire?
Sign up for any of these?
Not yet.
I don't know what his availability. I know exactly. Joe will take all the rest.
All right, so we need 1 and 4 for Joe.
We'll put that down.
Tentative.
4 and by tomorrow, I'll pin down if I have to bail, I'll let you know immediately.
I can be on deck. If you can't make number 4, I'll make number 4.
Great. Thank you both. That's great. So
Covers us for 1 board member per meeting, correct?
that's correct.
Okay, all right.
I did too. Just.
Oh, Tony did too.
Tony
Okay.
did 2.
Okay,
And we
Oh,
have
oh,
Joe down
Krista's-
for 2.
okay. I could tentatively.
And
do
Krista
number
is 2.
7.
Okay. Thank
Next
you,
week's
Jeff.
Just really, yeah.
So
I
what I
think I
have,
follow
let me make sure we have the right ones. Krista, I have you number 3 and number 4. And Tony, I have you number 2 and number 5. And Jeff, I have you number 6 and number 7. And Kim, I have you number 7 and on deck for number 4.
And I
Number
think I
6.
took over 6 for Krista.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Joe, we're hoping number 1.
1, 4, 6. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding, Joe.
So you don't show up.
Right.
Okay, that's it. Thank you all very, very much. Any comments, any questions?
Slight differences in the times on here versus up there.
Oh. Yeah, up there, they're all 5:30 to 7. Or
These are correct.
the slide is correct, not the.
Glenshire says 6 to 7:30 on this flyer.
You know, I think that's correct. Let me see this.
Todd honors 3 to 4:30 on this flyer.
Yeah, it's 3 to 4:30.
Okay, and Glenshire is actually 6, that actually makes it easier for me.
Glenshire is 6.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. So that should make it easier for working too. And we're at Glenshire Elementary. Okay. And we'll confirm this, but the flyer you have is accurate.
That's correct. Okay, that's a go.
Any other comments, questions?
It's always exciting to hear what the community is thinking.
Oh,
It is. Thank you.
all right.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And just so I can be legal, public comment. Any public out there want to say something? Any, while Shauna's looking?
No, Mr.
No.
President.
Any other further thoughts or comments? Okay. Looking good. Thank you. Community circles. All right. That takes us to item number 17, greenhouse gas inventory results. Thank you, Pam.
Good evening, President Bender, members of the board. Appreciate everybody's time tonight, I realized that I have a bit of a captive audience. And so I will try to make this concise and efficient, but also, to the point and not dropping any details. I'm happy to answer any and all questions that come forth. But we are going to be producing a comprehensive report in addition to this workshop that will, give a full treatment of the material being presented here tonight. So staff is presenting a workshop on a recent greenhouse gas inventory that was initiated earlier this year. And we want to provide a high-level summary of the findings and the results for this initiative, or sorry, for this inventory, especially in light of all of the various projects and initiatives that are germane to the topic that are currently occurring in the district. Before jumping into specifics here, I wanted to take a moment to kind of define some terms. In kind of the climate world, there are a lot of common terms that get thrown about. And some of them are left a bit maybe vague or underdefined. A lot of people have different conflicting definitions for what they mean when they say renewable or when they say clean, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought it would be helpful if we just kind of started with some definitions so that going forward, everybody can be on the same page with what we mean by certain terms. So starting with carbon emissions as a term, here in this inventory, we define it to include 6 specific greenhouse gases listed here, which includes carbon dioxide, but it also includes methane, nitrous oxide, sulfur hexafluoride, hydrofluorocarbons, and perfluorocarbons. And these are the 6 gases that you would find in the Kyoto Protocol, as well as in California climate legislation like AB 32 and SB 32, et cetera. So, it's consistent with industry standards for carbon inventories and greenhouse gas reporting. Now, that's a lot, though, to kind of keep track of, right? 6 different gases. And turns out that not all of them are created equal. Some of them actually trap more heat than other gases, right? They have a larger greenhouse gas effect than other gases. And that's known as the global warming potential of the gas. Methane, for example, has, I believe, it'll trap 25 times more heat than the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide. So it's said to have a global warming potential of 25, right? If I had 1 unit, one ton of methane that was emitted, that would be equivalent to 25 tons of carbon dioxide. So it provides a convenient way for us to kind of normalize our metrics into a common unit, which we call carbon dioxide equivalent. So we take all of these different gases and we use their global warming potentials to come up with what their carbon dioxide equivalent would be. And then we can sum it all together and report it in a single convenient metric that is able to kind of convey the overall point and be an easy way for us to measure our progress against. Now, moving on to 2 other terms, net carbon reduction, which we've talked about, and zero carbon resource. These are terms that also one might see in everywhere from legislation to corporate statements of sustainability. Zero carbon resource, for example, actually specifically is listed in SB 100, which expanded the renewable portfolio standard and added additional benchmarks, but with the ultimate goal, ultimate requirement of having a portfolio mix of 60% renewable and 40%, which what is called out in the legislation as zero carbon resource by 2045 with benchmarks in between. Now, the legislation actually does not currently define what it means by zero carbon. It's kind of currently left a little bit up to people to surmise, and it's going to be defined hopefully soon. But we're left trying to figure out how are we going to satisfy this, while at the same time we have our own internal initiatives. And we are talking about how we want to set those and where we want those to be, where we want to draw those lines. And so we have our net carbon reduction strategic initiative. And here, carbon is defined consistent with the carbon emissions above, right? And net is a small but important word because it recognizes that not only are we concerning ourselves with the sources of emission, so the power plants, and either changing the technology to a cleaner technology or just reducing the amount of power that is called for, but we're also including in our economic modeling and in our kind of world of mitigation possibilities, the opportunity to just kind of to take carbon out of the atmosphere actively. So that would open up things like wetland restoration, et cetera. So these are going to be terms that I think are helpful to have defined ahead of time here as we go into the greenhouse gas inventory results. And I think it would be good to continue to have these discussions in any similar topic. So referred to a couple of the bits of legislations. I think everybody here is pretty familiar with the decades of climate legislation in California, in particular, AB 32 and SB 32. Resulted early on in the cap and trade markets with that CARB is implementing. And that resulted in a requirement for utilities to report greenhouse gas emissions. Similarly, SB 100, an extension of the renewable portfolio standard, also has its own reporting requirements. And the portfolio renewable standard results annually a power content label, which lists on it our greenhouse gas emission, the greenhouse gas intensity of our overall power mix. And I think it's pounds of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. And then we have our conservation programs that are in the background there as well. In addition to that, we have our own internal objectives. This is actually not the first inventory that the utility has done. An initial inventory was done in 2012 and then subsequently updated in 2013. And that was kind of the initial look at what the overall greenhouse gas content footprint is for the district. We've talked about evolving sustainability programs before in previous workshops. The programs are shifting away from conservation widgets and towards beneficial electrification, as well as education and behavior. The integrated resource plan, which has been talked about this evening, is in process, and the greenhouse gas inventory is expected to be a useful waypoint along the way with all of these different activities that are occurring in the background. I think that the important word here that I wanted to kind of emphasize is underlined here is that the district wants to make meaningful progress towards GHG mitigation. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later is the differences between how we report GHG, how we report our greenhouse gas emissions to CARB and to the CEC compared to what was done here in this inventory. And it's along the lines of trying to make meaningful progress. So the objectives of this inventory were to update the numbers. The last one was done in 2013. Those numbers are stale, no longer particularly relevant to our current context. So we wanted to update the numbers so we knew where we were at. Secondly, we want to provide some critical insight into all of these different activities that are occurring, the integrated resource plan, our future programs, et cetera. And we want to have a system that we can use, a metric that we can use to assess how we go about doing projects or certain activities here at the district. We want some real world numbers so that we can say, yeah, this meets this particular initiative or this particular objective, and these are the numbers that support it and why that is the case. And lastly, the study was done in a way such that the results can be complementary to other greenhouse gas inventories that are done locally. The results here can be taken up by the town of Truckee or other local agencies when they do their inventories, and it can inform their inventories, and it can make their inventories a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more rigorous. So if we're already reporting greenhouse gas emissions to two different agencies, why are we doing yet a third inventory, right? And so I reached back into my elementary school toolbox and I pulled out a Venn diagram to illustrate the point that they're not quite the same thing. The reporting that we do to CARB and to the CEC are governed by a political process. They are reporting standards that were established to support a public policy. And therefore, they're not going to be as germane to our objective, which is not to support that public policy, but rather to find meaningful ways that we can mitigate carbon emissions locally. And so by necessity, our process is going to be a little bit different. Not to say that we didn't follow industry standards. We didn't make this up, but the standards that we did follow and the protocols that we did follow were germane to the fundamental objectives that we went over earlier. So what are the differences? A lot of the differences can kind of come down to some of the engineering assumptions that we use to estimate the greenhouse gas content of the electricity that is generated by the different technologies. And we did some research on this subject matter to try and figure out what the best numbers are presently available to use to make those estimates. And what we settled on was a study recently published by the National Renewable Energies Labs, NREL, in 2021 that looked at life cycle greenhouse gas emissions for a number of technologies. I think one of the takeaways here is that there's no such thing from a life cycle perspective as a totally carbon-free resource. There are certainly resources that don't actively generate carbon during the generation process. A great example of that, one that we have is Veo. It's a heat recovery cycle. It uses waste heat that would otherwise just go into the atmosphere to heat up steam, to drive a turbine, make electricity. And so in the process of generating the electricity, it doesn't produce any emissions. However, emissions were produced in the manufacture, the commissioning, and will be produced in the decommissioning and also in the maintenance of that facility. So the NREL study attempted to account for those aspects of the different technologies and provide a number for what the overall life cycle emissions per megawatt hour produced of the different technologies are. One notable missing technology here before we move on is landfill natural gas, because we have landfill natural gas in our portfolio. There's actually very little research out there available for numbers for landfill natural gas, and I think part of the reason for that is there's a couple different perspectives that one can approach it with. One would be like a gross perspective. The landfill natural gas is essentially methane, very similar to natural gas. So you burn it, you're releasing CO2. So from a gross perspective, yeah, it's going to have a similar emissions content to a natural gas plant. However, you could also approach it from a net perspective and say, well, methane has 25 times more global warming potential than CO2. So if we can convert that methane to CO2 and get some electricity out in the process, then that's a net benefit to everybody. So it's actually one could theoretically treat it as a sink So to have a negative carbon emission content, right? And then, you could take a step further and say, well, the landfill's filled with stuff that people threw away. So it was all caused by humans to begin with. So we can't give ourselves credit for something that we're, already doing. So there's a lot of debate, I think, on the subject matter. So for this study, we went ahead and went with what we currently report to CARB and CEC with, which was just a zero. It's a carbon neutral emissions for the generation process. However, we did include some downstream, decommissioning and upstream commissioning components to the overall content. We borrowed from natural gas in an NREL study for the downstream and upstream components for it, because that's the closest analog in terms of the technology. So back to standard approach. What is in a standard approach? Well, it's defined for us by the general reporting protocol from the Climate Registry. So that's what was followed. Then there's a couple supplementary resources specifically for the electric power sector and water power sector, water sector. The process of executing a greenhouse gas inventory can kind of be summarized in 4 steps. I guess maybe 3. But the first and maybe arguably most important step is defining the boundary. From in engineer speak, what is your control volume? Where are we going to draw the line to figure out what is our emissions and what is everybody else's emissions? The second step, once you've kind of figured that out, is now I've got my boundary. What are the emission sources within my boundary, and how am I going to quantify the value of those emissions? Finally, you measure and quantify, and then report the findings. The general reporting protocol offers 3 different ways, 3 different methodologies to draw one's organizational boundary. First is operational control, which is essentially anything that an organization or entity has direct operational control over would be included in the emissions. Secondly, similar, but for financial control. Anything that an entity or organization has direct financial control over is included in the emissions. Finally, there's the equity share approach, which kind of starts with operational control. It includes everything that one has operational control over, but then it expands to say, okay, anything that an entity has an equity share in would be included in the boundary. And consistent with our objectives for the study, we went with an equity share for our organizational boundary. And so the operational components to that, as far as they apply to the district, include all of our operations and maintenance for local transmission and distribution resources. Similarly, on the water side, water pumping, treatment, distribution, et cetera. It includes the district headquarters building and any facility that the district operates, as well as all of our fleet vehicles. The equity component then includes those power generation resources for which the district has an equity share in. And that boils down to 3 different generation resources, one being Horse Butte, Veo, and then Nebo. We also do have surface water rights on Donner Lake, and we have water rights in 6 local springs. However, the nature of those water sources don't actually result in any anthropogenic or human-caused emissions to report. So those were explored, but there were no emissions there to report. So once we have the boundary established, reporting emissions gets a little bit convoluted. It's a bit of a convoluted accounting exercise, right? Because what one person considers, their emissions, another person might also kind of think they might have a part in, or it's not as clear cut as we might want it to be. So the reporting protocol separates emissions reporting into kind of three general categories or scopes. The first one being direct. Scope 1 is direct emissions. So those would be essentially direct combustion, either through stationary or mobile combustion sources, or fugitive emissions. So emissions from gases that are released due to processes on site. So that would include natural gas burned at this building, fuel burned in our fleet vehicles, et cetera. Scope 2 is indirect, or they're indirect emissions. However, because they don't occur directly here on site, but they are emissions for which we are responsible because it was our demand for that resource that resulted in those emissions, and that's specifically electricity. Any electricity that our facilities use in our day-to-day operations for us are reported under Scope 2. Scope 3 is kind of a catch-all for everything else. And it can be as expansive as one has time and effort to put into it. With infinite time and resources, I suppose you could do it all. It turns out though that the single largest contributor there for us is going to be our electricity sales. I think the one takeaway before we move on from here, emissions are only like meaningfully compared within their scope, because if we were to try and look at the overall emissions for regionally for Truckee, we can't take our Scope 3 emissions and then add that to the whatever emissions the town of Truckee might report in their greenhouse gas inventory, because those are overlapping. Because our Scope 3 emissions include emissions that they're going to also be reporting. So it's important that when we're looking at emissions from different organizations, that the scopes are maintained separately. Okay, jumping into some specifics here. I don't think I'm going to spend a whole lot of time here. This slide kind of itemizes the different emission sources that we reviewed under Scope 1. And the results is we found that for calendar year 2022, the district emitted about 9,400 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And remember, this includes the equity component. So this includes the power generated at NEBO. In fact, the power that NEBO generated, our equity share in that is the vast majority here of the blue that you see on the plot. And it represents the biggest potential mitigation we have available to us for Scope 1 if we can move away from NEBO to other less carbon intensive resources. So because that was so overwhelming, I subtracted that out to look at what our local operations are here at the district. So local operation emissions were 641 tons CO2 equivalent. And the plots below show that they are dominated by our mobile emissions. That's going to be our fleet vehicles. So if we wanted to make the biggest local impact, it would start with fleet vehicles. I would note that the data that we had available to us was somewhat coarse for fuel, because we looked at historical fuel purchases through the accounting system, and they don't necessarily, when we purchased the fuel, isn't necessarily when it was burnt, when it was used. And so you see a giant purchase, here in February, which was likely a lot of the local generators for like the well houses and stuff. And so a lot of that it would actually be distributed across the year. With the new vehicle telemetry software that we have, we'll be able to get a much finer resolution on that. So going forward, we'll have better data to look at that. So again, takeaway is that the locally our fleet is the biggest source of emissions. More broadly speaking, for scope 1, it's our equity in the Nebo natural gas. Scope 2 emissions, now again, electricity consumed by the district. We get a cooler squiggly graph that because we had hourly data.
I want to make one point of clarification. District fleet vehicles are not the largest generation of emissions locally. He means locally within our own emissions. I just want to make sure that this slide doesn't get misinterpreted. It's the largest generation of local emissions here is the district's fleet. Just making sure that distinction is there.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's an important distinction within our organizational boundary. The scope 2 emissions, electricity, we were able to differentiate between the water department and electric department. The dark blue is the water department, and then the lighter yellow or mustard is the electric department. The bottom graph was added just as a point of comparison, just for the sake of kind of establishing magnitudes. We did include transmission losses in the study, and it can be seen that transmission losses are fairly minor compared to the overall picture, but they were included in our study. So takeaway here. The water infrastructure uses predominantly more electricity than all of our other infrastructure locally. So in terms of mitigations for scope 2 emissions, the focus would be, biggest bang for the buck would be to start with the water infrastructure. Scope 3 emissions, I didn't really provide a full treatment here for the sake of brevity. But I did look at, or I did provide some high level information for our retail sales of electricity. So electricity consumed by our customers. That was really interesting to look at. I could look at this data for days. Emissions for scope 3 for our sales to customers were almost 25,000 tons of CO2 equivalent for 2022. And the top plot here shows the emissions profile throughout the year in tons of CO2. So when those tons were emitted. The bottom plot shows the megawatt hours of electricity that were consumed over the course of the year. And I think the next plot's probably going to be a little bit more interesting, although this one's pretty cool. So this squiggly mess on the left here shows the emissions intensity of our resource mix over the course of several years, starting in 2022 and going into 2020, a little bit into 2023. And I think we don't need to spend a ton of time here, but the takeaway here is that every hour of the year, it's different. It's constantly varying because of the availability of the different generation sources. So that profile is not constant. It's not like this constant emissions, pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour throughout the year. It's constantly changing. And so that's part of the strategy, within our resource planning effort is not only what resources, what the carbon intensity of those resources are, but how can we get them at the times that we need them? And what resources are going to be able to provide those low carbon intensities during those time periods when we needed them. And if we look kind of to the right here, this was actually kind of cool. I discovered this today, which I was excited about. So this looks at data starting all the way back in 2020 and breaks it out through 2023. And it looks at, for each quarter of the year, for those years, what does our average hourly profile look like for our carbon intensity? And you can see that they're, for 2020, 2021, 2022, they kind of follow the kind of standard residential profile of like a peak in the morning, peak in the evening. But then 2023, you see a big difference there? That's when Nebo came on. Or sorry, not Nebo, Red Mesa came on. And you can see it dramatically change in quarters 2 and 3. You can see kind of the development of the duck curve, so to speak. So I thought that was pretty cool, and that's something that I hope to explore in the future. Okay, so bringing it all together. There are some next steps. As I alluded to earlier, staff's going to be putting together a comprehensive report on the greenhouse gas inventory. It's going to give a much more detailed treatment of the data that was presented here for each of the different scopes. We've also already kind of kicked off a more detailed audit of our water infrastructure, looking at GHG and energy consumption there. The inventory here, now that we've established a framework, we intend to update it on an annual basis, at least the data that can be refreshed, and then we can explore a reasonable time frame for more rigorous and detailed efforts. As far as takeaways, one of the things that that we've talked about internally is how to establish a baseline for our carbon emissions, and where should that line be drawn? Previously, it was done in 2008 because 2008 was the year that CARB established its cap and trade program. But a lot's changed since 2008. In fact, AB 32, which set the initial goals for carbon reductions, decided, well, they found out that they met their goals ahead of time in 2016, and so that legislation was then updated with SB 32, which increased the goals. And so it's kind of a second phase, if you will. And with our recent net carbon reduction initiative, it stands that given that 2022 is the most rigorous data that we have for our carbon emissions, and given all those timelines, that 2022 makes sense as a year that we could use or should use to measure our progress against going forward for greenhouse gas emissions. And the overall objective just being to come up with an objective measurement, a way to assess how we are, what meaningful real world differences we are making in our emissions here at the district moving forward. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Great, thank you. Any public comment?
No, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you. Greenhouse gases, where are we at, Kim?
That was very informational, and you really can kind of geek out on it. So I appreciate your passion towards presenting this, and I definitely feel like I'm a lot more knowledgeable about greenhouse gases with this one presentation. So thank you.
Yes, no, thank you. Same. Yeah, no, it's nice to see, where our places where we can make a difference are.
Right.
And point those out and start formulating a plan to work on those. So I appreciate that. And so, yeah, we'll look forward to the full report.
Yeah. Ditto. I look forward to the full report. It's you don't know what you have to have the data to know that you're making a difference, and we have to start somewhere, and this is a great place to start. And I was surprised that we can update it annually. It seems like an effort, and I'm pleased, I'm very pleased that you've created a structure that you can easily keep track of these things year over year. So that's, I think it's really going to be very helpful to us moving forward, like you said, and we can come back to the community and say, look, we're doing these things. You asked us to, and we are. And I really appreciate all these efforts, and you answered all my questions that I had in my thing in your presentation. So thank you.
I also just, understanding sort of the carbon footprint of the different resources on that graph that you presented was really, I think, is very valuable, because we need to also evaluate that as when it comes to the IRP. And the decisions we make to bring in resources into this community. You know, I think it's a valuable piece of education for not only us, but the community to say, you know, everything has a carbon footprint.
Right, cradle to grave,
Yeah.
carbon
Exactly.
footprint.
Everything has a
That-
carbon footprint and, you know, surprisingly, some things that we think don't do.
Yeah.
And so I think this is really important to keep at the forefront of our discussions about what resources we bring into the community.
Yeah, look at pumped storage hydropower,
Yeah.
7.4, right? Does that include the concrete for the dam though?
Right? We're working on that. It's
It's a circular argument, Jeff.
we're just gonna get better and better. All
Right,
these
right, right.
processes are gonna get better. Got to start somewhere.
I really like just the insight into Nebo, you know, that it's like, boom, that's what we should try and get rid of. And
Yeah,
and
which I did
replace
not
with
think
a
of
different
at all.
resource.
Right.
So,
I don't know. It depends on how we look at it though.
well,
You
and
know,
then
if it's
if
just
we-
methane going out there,
right,
Yeah, that's a conundrum.
that's a conundrum.
You know.
I'm gonna put that aside. That's.
no, it's really good timing, having the data right here and then talking about our net reduction strategy and community circle input, IRP. Pretty good stuff here.
Yeah, Mario, you exceeded your. Awesome.
Okay. Last call. All right. Thank you very much.
One of the quick things I wanted to add for the boards kind of to keep in the back of your mind as we kind of go down this journey over the next couple of months with the several projects is at the end of this, we really want the board's feedback in setting carbon reduction goals as one of the initiatives so that staff can start measuring our projects against those goals. And so you see in some of the staff reports, we include, you know, what are some of the drivers or the goals that some of the projects are in alignment with, whether it's environmental stewardship or financial stability, whatever it might be. You'll see in the staff report, if we're building a new pump station, what goals that project's in alignment with. We'll also start to include what these projects contribute to the overall carbon reduction goal. And so we'll be looking for board's help and guidance in setting what that is. It's a big lift, and there's a lot of options there. We can set baselines with the 2022 data. We can set it to the 2008 or 2012 data. I think in alignment with our strategic plan and the initiatives of looking forward, we want to use this really comprehensive study as our baseline. We can also set targets within different scopes. And so you saw scope 3 is our items we don't really have a lot of control of, but they can inform our rebate programs or our behavior change programs with our community. Scope 1 is clearly our energy generation sources and our fleet. Those are low hanging fruit, so to speak. They're not easy to accomplish, but they're definitely very clearly defined. Scope 2, we work on, you know, our water to water efficiencies on the water programs. And so you'll start to see these in our staff reports. And as we present projects, kind of the return on investment, including the carbon footprint as that investment, not just, you know, water resource sustainability, but the carbon footprint associated with it.
That will be very.
A little homework for you to think of.
Right.
Nice.
Stuff. Great.
Thank you. We got some routine business. We have the treasurer's report, September 2023, which includes bills that have already been paid.
No. Joe's not here.
Joe's not here. It's in the back of our packet. Is there a
I
motion?
make a move to approve the treasurer's report and pay the bills.
I'll second.
Okay, Shauna, roll call, please.
Director Finn,
Yes.
Director Harris,
Yes.
Vice President Liliotis.
Yes.
President Bender.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, 19, routine. Approved minutes of August 2nd, 2023 and August 16th, 2023.
I had a comment. So at the August 2nd meeting, there was an item that I pulled off a consent to talk about room rentals. And when it was approved, when the motion was made, I believe it was made whatever staff had written with a caveat that staff to make a due diligence for economic choices, basically to look at other room rentals in the area that are more economical. And that did not get added to the minutes. And I was hoping to be able to get that staff direction added to the minutes. Because as I told Brian earlier today in an email with Steve, and Steve explained it to me, I probably would have voted no if it was just the recommended motion by staff. But the reason why I voted yes is because we added that caveat onto it. So I just wanted to add it into the minutes, the staff direction to look at other options for room rentals.
If I might add, if we recall the discussion, Director Harris and Director Laliotis and a few others had discussion, and staff is in alignment and took that kind of general understanding as direction. So in support of Director Harris's request, there was a discussion on, we want to approve the proposed contract as presented by staff with the understanding and direction to also do due diligence and making sure that there's other opportunities pursued if they're more economically feasible. And so I just wanted to kind of help add that that's what staff understood as the approval at the time.
But in the minutes, it only reflects the
action.
the action that staff recommended.
And you would like to add this direction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just add it to the minutes.
Mhm.
Is this an issue of
Okay.
action
Yeah.
reporting versus greater detail in the minutes?
I think Steve would like, yeah.
Thank you. That's a great question that I thought about earlier when Kim asked the question. And the district code does provide guidance on the minutes, and the code provides that the minutes of the meetings shall, among other things, state action taken or direction given. And I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I think if there's action taken, that should be reported. If there's direction by a majority of the board, and it constitutes direction of the board to staff, that should be reflected also. So I don't think it's inconsistent to add that direction. The potential challenges are sometimes we have discussion where it's not quite clear whether or not the direction is the direction of at least the majority of the board versus direction of one or two board members. But I think, given the discussion we've had, it seemed as though that was the direction of the board, was one, to approve the motion, that was the action taken, and then to also consider other potentially economic venues for other meetings. So I don't think it's inconsistent with the district code to include both that action taken and direction given. Does that answer your question, Tony?
Yes, thank you.
That's,
So
what would I want to hear is a motion to approve the minutes or approve the minutes with adding direction to them per Kim's request.
And I have one other item.
Oh.
Because it was two sets of minutes at the August 16th minutes, which I was not there. There was a public comment from Emily Cashton, and then the day after she provided basically an email to the board. And I don't know if it's appropriate to include in the minutes that additional comment was provided to the board by Emily the next day to just kind of bring it a little more full circle. But I did see that the public comment is available on the website in the new.
Right, so that really
So-
wasn't a record of the meeting.
Correct.
So,
So
yeah.
but that's just something else that kind of went through my head. But I would like to move to approve the minutes of August 2nd and August 6th. Well, do you guys want to discuss anything more before I make a motion?
Well, I'd be in favor of the first request, adding the direction to second, 16th, I think.
Yeah,
Leave
16th.
it as
Yeah,
is.
just
Okay.
click on the link and find it because it wasn't a part of the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
ahead and
is
make
So I'll
everything.
go ahead and
Well,
move to approve the minutes of August 2nd with the addition that we just discussed about staff direction to consider other room rental in the area that are more economical. And then August 16 minutes as published.
I'll second.
Okay. Roll call. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Finn,
Yes.
Director Harris,
Yes.
Vice President Liliotis.
Yes.
President Bender.
Yes,
Thank you.
And
thank
just
you.
as a side note, I'll try to be more careful about motions and making sure that it's added prior to the motion rather than after the fact. So I apologize. Thank
That's
you.
fine, but this is why we review minutes. So.
All right. Closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 549.